The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind and Create Emotional Well-Being from Chapter 1, How Trauma Sticks and the Mechanism of PTSD. One of the enduring mysteries in the field of psychology is why the same event produces such different memories and responses in different people. As the New York Times reported in a July 1st, 2004 article, 1 out of every 6 soldiers coming home from the war in Iraq is showing signs of emotional difficulties, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder. Citing a report in the New England Journal of Medicine, the writer noted the researchers surveyed more than 6,000 soldiers in the month before and after service in Iraq and Afghanistan. Almost 17% of those who fought in Iraq reported symptoms of major depression, severe anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder, compared with 11% of the troops who served in Afghanistan. In World War II, post-war depression and anxiety was called battle fatigue. In World War I, we called it shell shock. The question isn't so much why it happens. We know GIs in war do and see horrific things. The question that perplexes us is why post-war anxiety and depression haunts some veterans and not others. Of course, some vets see harder combat than others, but even that doesn't account for the statistics. There are still huge variations among individual soldiers in how they respond to the same event. The same is true in the civilian world. Some people develop PTSD and others don't, facing the exact same circumstances. In order to understand why some people are still shocked months and even years after a traumatic event, it's necessary to first understand how the brain and mind processes trauma. The brain is a complex collection of deeply interconnected parts and processes. I'm vastly oversimplifying here for the purpose of description. In light of those caveats, here's a possible scenario that's not inconsistent with much of what's known about brain function. There's a part of the limbic brain, or visceral brain, called the hippocampus that's believed to function as a one-day scratch pad for memory. Everything you experience throughout the day is stored in the hippocampus. In order for the impressions of the experience to become a long-term memory, they must pass through the hippocampus into the rest of the brain. People with a damaged hippocampus remember past events but have extreme difficulty learning new things. Although the rest of the brain is able to integrate recent information from the hippocampus in relation to stored memories, in order to understand that one thing happened a week ago and another thing happened a month ago, the hippocampus knows only one time, today. During the night as we sleep, the hippocampus dumps its information from the day into the rest of the brain for processing, sorting, storing, and disposing of irrelevant information. As the brain is processing the details of the day from the hippocampus, we experience what we call dreaming. Many sleep researchers are convinced that when we experience REM sleep, most of the events, including the traumas of our daily life, are processed. The processing of information management completed. When we wake up in the morning, the hippocampus is once again empty and ready to record another day. The problem emerges when the hippocampus is carrying information that's too much or too hot for the larger brain/mind to handle. When a recent memory is too strong to be easily and unremarkably processed, it presents in our dream world as a nightmare. If that still doesn't download the information from the hippocampus, then the trauma either becomes buried in the subconscious, a process Freud referred to as repression, or it gets thrown back into the hippocampus the next morning. It's as if the brain says, whoa, that's too much for me to process in one evening. Please hang on to it for another day. When the person wakes up in the morning, the information's still there in the hippocampus, still remembered and known and felt as if it happened that same very day. The conjecture that the hippocampus knows little about the more distant past accounts for the unique feature of true PTSD, that the person feels every day as if the past event happened today, or at least in the very recent past. The trauma is always front, center, new, fresh, and raw. The consequences can be psychologically and emotionally devastating. Every day is affected by a past event. The traumatic event never passes from now until then and is never processed and filed away in the memory banks, where it loses the power to cause pain and problems on a daily basis. The impact of this on the mind and the emotions is staggering. Brain scans even demonstrate that before a PTSD event has been processed, the amygdala, a part of the brain responsible for strong emotional states, such as those involved with survival or the perception of a threat to survival, and the hippocampus are not functioning normally. The brain scan makes it possible to, in a way, see the effect of the stuck memory. After processing the memory, these parts of the brain usually return to normal functioning. One of the key concepts of many schools of psychology is that human beings are most functional when every part of the mind has access to all other parts. In particular, this functionality is a matter of having full access to positive resources, such as memories of times when we were successful in our undertakings and the good feelings we associate with those accomplishments. Working from this level of functionality, then, when we take on a new task, for example, we first remember times in the past when we attempted something similar and accomplished our goals. This functionality can be accessed in all endeavors, from embarking on a new love relationship to making your first public speaking engagement. Memories of past accomplishments and capabilities are stored in parts of the brain far from the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala and hippocampus, part of our brain's most primary and primitive structures, lie deep in the brain. Thus, having a negative memory stuck deep in the hippocampus blocks the pain and fear associated with that memory from reaching and associating with positive memories and resource states, which are housed in more distant parts of the brain. So in other words, if we don't get these traumatic memories out of the hippocampus, then everything coming in gets filtered through that and blocked having access to resource states that can help and heal us. So the rest of the book is how to get that stuff out of the hippocampus. The book is Walking Your Blues Away.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Fake news indeed. This great piece by Dean Obeidallah over at the Daily Beast. Mr. President, a terrorist is on trial right now. You know, the president is saying terrorist incidents are underreported. He says a trial began in federal court on Monday of a radical religious cleric who allegedly plotted to kill Americans of another faith to prove his commitment to our God, his words. Why haven't you heard about this, you might be asking? Could it be, as Donald Trump claimed Monday, that the dishonest media is not covering all radical Islamic terror plots? No, the actual reason is the man on trial in Tennessee Federal District Court is not Muslim. Rather, he is a self-professed Christian minister, Robert Doggart. He's a dangerous man. Undercover agents allege that Doggart was plotting. I'm sharing with you from Dean Obeidallah's piece. That Doggart was plotting to travel to upstate New York to kill Muslims there using explosives, an M4 assault rifle, and even a machete to cut the infidels to shreds. The FBI's investigation also found that Doggart viewed himself as a religious warrior who wanted to kill Muslims to show his commitment to his Christian God. Doggart even boasted that the attack on Muslims, quote, will be cruel and we will burn down their buildings, and if anybody attempts to harm us in any way, we will take them down, end quote. Interestingly enough, if you do, at least I haven't done this in the last hour or so, but Dean Obeidallah says if you do a Google search, this is presumably a day or so ago when he wrote this article, of Robert Doggart, the only story that you find is from a local Tennessee media outlet. But back in September, 3 men known as the Crusaders, Dean writes, as in the Christian Crusaders, were arrested for plotting to kill Muslim refugees in Kansas. In December, white supremacist Glendon Scott Crawford was sentenced to 30 years to life for trying to build a radioactive weapon to kill Muslim Americans. And all this comes only a week and a half after an anti-immigrant Canadian man who had expressed his support for Trump online walked into a Quebec mosque and opened fire, murdering 6 Muslims and wounding a whole bunch more. And, a word from anybody? The president, the press? Not so much.
So here we have all these examples of right-wing terrorism happening in the United States. In fact, according to the FBI, since 9/11, more people have been killed by right-wing terrorists than by Muslims. So what are we to make of articles like Kurt Schlichter's piece over at townhall.com titled "The Left Hates You, Act Accordingly"? I find this fascinating. He writes, "They hate you. Leftists don't merely disagree with you. They don't merely feel you are misguided. They don't merely think you are wrong. They hate you. They want you enslaved and obedient, if not dead. Once you get that, everything that is happening now will make sense, and you will understand what you need to be ready to do." Oh, really? Now, you know, I think you could argue from a psychological point of view that this is a classic case of projection. People are literally only able to see the world through their own eyes. Empathy is a great thing, you know, empathy being sort of the ability to see the world through somebody else's eyes or walk in their moccasins or feel through their skin or whatever. But it has its limits. And so, you know, we always tend to assume that other people are acting in ways that we ourselves would act. I remember when I was like 7 years old and I was in second grade, and a kid accused me of stealing his pencil box. And the teacher, you know, brought me up to the front of the class and dressed me, and I hadn't done it. And I was just shattered by this. I went home and I was just really upset. And my dad sat me down and he said, "Everybody judges you by themselves." He said, "If that kid, you know, is just assuming that everybody," it turned out the kid had lost it, and he found it actually in his own coat in his you know, later on in the day. So I was sort of vindicated, but you know, it still stung. But you know, he said, people who steal assume other people will steal. You know, it gives you an insight into their personality. He said, you know, people who walk around thinking about sex all day assume everybody walks around thinking about sex all day. Well, maybe everybody does. I don't know. But, you know, my dad gave me like a whole bunch of examples. As I don't remember all of them. I was 7 years old. But I remember that really vividly. And that was when I learned about projection. He didn't talk about Sigmund Freud. He didn't talk about, you know, the origins of hysteria and all this kind of stuff. But so that's Kurt Schlichter's piece over at Town Hall. I'll share a little more of it with you. I also want to kind of, in between, share with you a piece from chapter 10 of a rather famous book. In this book, well, I'll read you the first paragraph from chapter 10 with the proviso that two words, actually in this first chapter, only one word has been changed. And I'll explain that to you after I read it. It must be admitted that all this was partly the result of extraordinarily crafty tactics on the part of liberals on the one hand, and obvious official stupidity or naivete on the other hand. The liberals were too clever to allow a simultaneous attack to be made on the whole of their press. No one section functioned as cover for the other. The national papers, also in liberal hands, knew how to camouflage themselves as model examples of objectivity. They studiously avoided harsh language, knowing well that blockheads are capable of judging only by external appearances and never able to penetrate the real depth and meaning of anything. This form of human frailty was carefully studied and understood by the liberal press. Well, that was from Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, chapter 10. And I simply replaced the word Jew with the word liberal. And going forward, replace the word Nazi with the word conservative and the word Germany with the word America. And this is what you get, the next paragraph. Certainly in days to come, the liberals will raise a tremendous cry throughout their newspapers. Once a hand is laid on their favorite nest, once a move is made to put an end to the scandalous liberal press, and once this instrument which shapes public opinion is brought under conservative control and no longer in the hands of liberals and enemies of the people, I am certain that this will be much easier for us than it was for our fathers. The scream of the 12-inch shrapnel is more penetrating than the hiss of 1,000 liberal newspaper vipers. Therefore, let them go on with their hissing. What soon gave me cause for very serious consideration, writes Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf, were the activities of the liberals in certain branches of life, into the mystery of which I penetrated little by little. Was there any shady undertaking, any form of foulness, especially in cultural life, in which at least one liberal did not participate? On putting the probing knife carefully to that kind of abscess, one immediately discovered, like a magnet in a putrescent body, a little liberal who was often blinded by the sudden light. In my eyes, the charge of liberalism became a grave one the moment I discovered the liberal activities in the press, in art, in literature, and the theater. All unctuous protests were more or less futile. Here was a pestilence, a moral pestilence, with which the public was being infected. I was happy to know at last for certain that a liberal is not an American. Now, of course, what he said was that a Jew is not a German. But it's the Reich, the right. So back to Kurt Schlichter in his The Left Hates You Act accordingly. You are normal and therefore a heretic, he's writing to his conservative friends. You refuse to bow to their idols, to subscribe to their twisted catechisms, to praise their false god. This is unforgivable. You must burn. Crazy talk? Just ask them. Go ahead. Go on social media. Find a leftist. It's easy. Just say something positive about America or Jesus, and they'll come swarming like locusts. They will tell you that Christians are idiots and veterans are scum, that normals are subhumans whose role is to labor as serfs to subsidize the progressive elite and its clients. They are ISIS, except with hashtags instead of AKs, committed to the establishment of a leftist caliphate. Kurt Schlichter writes. You can read this over at townhall.com. They are fanatics, and by not surrendering, by not kneeling, by not obeying, you have committed an unpardonable sin. You have defied the left, and you must be broken. They will take your job, slander your name, even beat or kill you. Whatever it takes to break you and terrify others by making you an example. They must crush this rebellion of the normal, and absolutely nothing is off the table. So the only outcome is that one side wins and the other loses. There's no truce to be had, no possibility of a tie. They hate us. And however they come at us, we need to be prepared to fight. It's an abbreviated version. You can read the entire article, as I said, over at townhall.com. And, of course, you can read Hitler's words over at Mein Kampf, which actually is now really selling well, along with more cautionary tales like They Thought They Were Free by Milton Mayer and The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt, which I strongly encourage you to check out. It's an amazing time we live in. What do we do with this? What do we do with this kind of projection, this kind of hatred? We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And somewhere I've got my call screen. There we go. Marianne in Everett, Michigan. Hey, Marianne, thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Good morning, Tom. I'm going to take you off speaker.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I have a piece of legislation that I would like you to channel your inner Bernie for me. I want to call, before I call people and ask them to contact. I heard yesterday on the news, and it's Senate Bill 247. Senator Stabenow is sponsoring legislation, and I'm assuming she's trying to pick up co-sponsors, that would, all the businesses that fled the United States over the last decade or so to go to other countries for cheaper labor and tax breaks and all that stuff. Basically, the gist of it sounds like she thinks it would be a great idea if they decide they want to come back to the United States, that they should not have to pay any kind of a fine, or we would also give them like tax abatements and add loopholes to the tax code or whatever. This just sounds so ludicrous to me, Tom.
Okay. What's your proposal?
Well, I'd like people to contact her office and their senators and just say, please don't co-sponsor this. This is a bad idea. Why would we be, giving them that tax break? If they went over there to make more money, as a small business person myself, I just feel like I pay the price if I make a choice or a decision and then later down the road decide, oh, this isn't working out the way I thought it might or whatever. And we keep giving them all these tax breaks, and then the responsibility of keeping up the infrastructure and everything else in the country falls back on middle class and lower income people.
Yeah. There's an important concept here, Mary Ann, that ties into everything you're talking about that I'd like to point out, and that is we don't give them the tax breaks. They buy legislators,
right,
and the legislators give them the tax breaks. It's a circle, and it's a dysfunctional circle. And
it's our money they're using, correct?
Yes, of course.
Exactly.
Or it's money that is, by the more you cut taxes on the very top, the more you're going to suck money out of the bottom. I mean, this is just very simple. You look at what has happened with income inequality in the United States since Reagan. Since the Reagan years to today, over $12 trillion has been literally removed from in assets and income, removed from working people, removed from the middle class, and handed to the top 1%, to a couple of 100,000 people. And made them mind-bogglingly rich, and that is the function of legislation. This is legislation that they bought and paid for. So that's where if we really want to focus our attention, it should be getting money out of politics and ending legalized bribery, which, by the way, was not something that any legislature ever proposed or any president ever proposed. It's something that was foisted upon us by the Supreme Court. Mary Ann, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So, how do we respond to this? And I don't mean to pick on Kurt Schlichter or Adolf Hitler for that matter, but this narrative from the hard right that the left is violent. The Weather Underground has been dead for 30 years, maybe 40 years, maybe 50 years. It's been a long time. And today's left are, they're walking around with pussy hats on, right? Which is not. I don't mean that deridingly. I mean it's like today's left is about protesting. It's about getting the message out. Yeah, there's some crazy black bloc protesters. I would not put them on the left. They're using violence to achieve their means. That's not a characteristic of the left in the United States. It's a characteristic of the right. What the left wants is to strengthen Social Security, to strengthen Medicare, to strengthen Medicaid, to make sure that every American, can have health insurance. They want free college educations paid for by higher taxes on rich people. Oh my God! I understand why right-wingers who are funded by rich people may have their heads explode when they hear that. Even right-wingers who are not rich people, because after all, they're funded by rich people. But that's I get that. If you want to accuse me or anybody else on the left of being in favor of wealth redistribution in the United States, I would say, yeah, and I would say conservatives are in favor of it too. They've been doing it for 35 years. They've been transferring wealth from the middle class to the very, very rich, who then have been funding this entire right-wing infrastructure and media machine and think tanks. And I mean, laid the whole thing out in the crash of 2016, starting with Lewis Powell in 71 with the Powell memo. And we got to take control of the colleges. We've got to take control of the courts. And now you've got the Federalist Society. And we've got to create think tanks that influence public opinion and, publish online journals and all this kind of stuff. And it's being done. But what do lefties want? They want kids to be able to go to college for free and not be dragging around student debt. They want everybody to have health care. Lefties think that when capitalism fails, as happens periodically, I mean, typically an expansionary period in our country lasts typically no more than 6 to 9 years. And then you go into a recession, and then you come back out. So when capitalism fails or hiccups, leftists would like government to be the employer of last resort. The last time we really did that was FDR's WPA and CCC and things like that, where he put people back to work. And arguably the GI Bill, which lasted from the early 40s or the mid 40s after the end of World War II, all the way up until the mid 60s. Was the end of the payments on the GI Bill. Lefties would like to do away with the so-called free trade, the whole neoliberal consensus. The idea that austerity, somehow cutting taxes on rich people, austerity with regard to all kinds of social programs, cutting all this, basically cutting social programs, and making it harder to vote for people. So somehow that's a good thing? No, leftists think no, that's not the case. We would like net neutrality. We'd like an even playing field. Which, by the way, Trump's head guy from the FCC, Mr. Pai, has said, no, we're not going to have net neutrality. We don't need no stinking net neutrality. Millions of new jobs, clean energy jobs. What's wrong with this? Well, it's going to cut into the profits of the Koch brothers and of ExxonMobil, and I get that. We're subsidizing fossil fuels in the United States to the tune of several $100 billion a year, which includes, of course, our, protecting the shipping lanes for oil both into the United States and out of the United States. But, lefties wanting to kill conservatives? Really? Why would someone say that? Where are the leftists who are on trial right now? Where are the leftists who are committed to murdering, people because of, political or religious differences? I don't know of any. I've never even, since the Weather Underground, and those people are, either dead or reformed. I mean, Bill Ayers is now an upstanding citizen. He just published a new book. He's a professor. Oh yeah, that's right. Professors are terrible. We got to do something about professors. So, breaking up the big banks. This is a lefty idea. It's called competition in a marketplace. Anyhow, we'll be back with your thoughts on all of this. Right after this break. Stick around. It's 28.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls after this. Did you see this thing? The scientists over at the Energy Department, they're scrambling to preserve the scientific data that they have. In fact, Jerry Brown, one of the things that was said during the campaign, or one of the incoming Trump people, is that they want to shut down the NASA satellites that are monitoring the temperature of the planet. Now, this is a variation on what Sam Brownback did in Kansas. Sam Brownback in Kansas said, we're going to do this great Reaganomics experiment. I still believe in Reaganomics, even though it's screwed the country. I think that it's real. This trickle-down economics, this theory, this crazy theory that Steve Moore and Alvin Lafler came up with, I think it's real, and we're going to do this in Kansas, home of the Koch brothers. We're going to dramatically cut the taxes on our millionaires and billionaires in Kansas, which is going to drop the state revenue dramatically. And we're going to cut funding. We're going to cut spending in the state of Kansas. And so we're going to cut aid to education. We're going to cut aid to poor people. We're going to cut aid to, we're just going to right across the board. And you will see, as a result of these lower taxes and fewer regulations and less, welfare, as it were, you'll see that Kansas is going to become the most vibrant economy in the entire United States. And Sam Brownback even assigned a special office, a special guy in a special office to simply day-to-day keep track of the economic statistics, proving that his experiment was working. Well, that was 2 or 3 years ago. The experiment's been a disaster. Kansas, and Bobby Jindal was doing the same thing in Louisiana for a different reason. Brownback was doing it because he's an ideologue. Bobby Jindal was doing it because he wants to become president. And so he figured if he, and Reagan is the great god of the Republicans. So if he did Reaganomics in Louisiana, in a big way, that, Louisiana, at least he'd be able to campaign for president that he had done this thing. And he created such a disaster in Kansas that this incredibly red state elected a Democratic governor to replace him. I mean, they were so sick of it. But what Sam Brownback did in Kansas is when the news started coming down that the state was sinking and sinking and sinking, mortality rate was going up, deaths were going up, childhood diseases were going up, educational outcomes were going down, suicide was going up, homicide was going up, drug addiction was going up. You pick the measure of quality of life. They were all collapsing and are to this day in Kansas. And so what did Sam Brownback do? Did he say, gee, I guess this experiment isn't working. We should go back to the FDR stuff that actually has been proven to work? No. He fired the guy and closed the office who was keeping track of the statistics, and he took them off the state website. So now you've got climate change deniers coming into the Trump administration, and they're saying, they're trying to say, well, there's no such thing as climate change, and if there is, it's got nothing to do with people, and blah, 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 blah. And how do we know about climate change? Well, one of the principal ways we know about it is NASA satellites that are measuring it, and ocean measuring stations all around the world. And so the guys coming into the Trump administration are saying, let's cut the funding for these programs. We don't need no stinking satellites. We don't need no stinking weather measurements. We know this stuff is just a lie. It's a hoax made up in China, to hurt American competitiveness. That's what Trump tweeted a couple of years back. And so, we'll just stop the satellites. So this is astonishing. Jerry Brown, the governor of California, he says, you guys do that? We'll launch our own satellites. Because climate change is affecting California in a big way, from wildfires to drought to, you name it, to loss of snowpack in the, what's that mountain range that runs through Southern California that is the main water source? In any case, there's a mountain range that runs there, and they have glaciers. And those glaciers, they build up in the winter and they melt down in the summer. They don't melt down to nothing, but you get snow melt in the summer. And, up near Truckee and all that part of California. And they've had so little snowfall that the glaciers are starting to vanish, and they're melting too. And when they finish melting, there will be no more water in the rivers, at least part of the year. And that's going to be a screaming disaster. And so Jerry Brown is like, if you guys aren't going to keep track of this, if you're not going to monitor what's going on, if you're not going to keep us safe, if you're not going to at least give us information to keep us safe, we will do it ourselves. But meanwhile, over at the Department of Energy, first of all, the Trump administration asked for a hit list of everybody at the Department of Energy. Rick Perry's going to run it now. Everybody at the Department of Energy who has anything to do with global warming at all, right? Have they been to a conference? Did they write a paper? Are they doing research? We want their names. And the DOE is saying, no, we're not going to give them to you. Now, after January 21st, they won't be able to say no anymore. But so far, they're saying no. And in the meantime, what they're doing is they're taking all that government data, and I'm not even sure this is legal. They're taking all this government data and they're stashing it on thumb drives and hard drives and whatnot to get it out of the building so that when the Trump administration comes in, we'll still have the data. just amazing.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's like this is like the Catholic Church in Galileo. You know, it's like the Earth is flat, the Earth is the center of the universe. These are the people who've taken over the executive branch of government. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, what a day. Betsy DeVos was just confirmed by the Senate. Mike Pence broke the tie. This is what, you know, I mean, we pretty much knew this was coming. I wasn't involved in this, but there were GoFundMe sites to raise for Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina and who was the other senator? Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. To raise more money for them than Betsy DeVos had given them, so that we could buy their votes. But and actually, we raised, the people running these GoFundMe pages actually raised more money to give to Pat Toomey if he would take it for his vote than and Richard Burr. They actually raised more money. But you know, the Republicans, they're like, you know, we're really committed to destroying public education, especially the teachers' unions. How dare they? Oh, my. Merle in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Merle, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I am very, very concerned over the uptick in hate speech and hate crimes that has accompanied this administration into office. And I'm even angrier about the silence of the Republicans and bloc to call it out. I feel they are complicit in it. They are part of the problem unless they speak out against it. And I have called my representatives, and I must point out that Ron Johnson's staff needs to listen to their emails or their voicemails and delete it, because his voicemail box has been full for the last 10 days.
That is not an accident,
I
Merle.
gave them my information. They can call me, and I will walk them through dumping those.
No. This is not an accident. This is their way of saying, this is Ron Johnson, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin's way of saying, that he doesn't care what his constituents think.
I know that, and I've mentioned that in emails. But the fact is, the Republicans are normalizing this type of speech and allow it to be characterized as protected speach.
Well, you know, Steve Bannon said, you know, Breitbart is the home of the alt-right. I broadly define that as, you know, the Nazis, basically. As, yeah. I mean, you know, the genuine Nazis in the United States have held a celebration of Donald Trump's election. The real Nazis.
Of course.
Right, Richard Spencer out there. Oh, yeah.
Of course. And I'll explain one of the reasons I'm so bent out of shape about this. But my idea was, can the Republicans in the House, or the Democrats in the House and the Senate, bring it to the attention on the floor each day, bring to attention an incidence of hate speech or a hate crime, and force the Republicans to go on record to either condemn it or not condemn it. They
could do that if they controlled the House or the Senate, but they don't control either one, so they don't control the ability to control the floor. And so, you know, basically they're going to have to do it by press conference and by email and by, you know, visiting their districts and that kind of thing. But
so be it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Merle, I've got to move along, but thank you very much for the call. Now, Nick in Yorkville, Illinois, listening on AM 820 WCPT. Hey, Nick, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, give me like a 10 seconds to get through this because it flows. Kind of going off of what you were just reading, that article, it's basically giving a false narrative or fake news, if you will, to this violence that's not happening. You know, I heard on this guy, his name is Thom Hartmann, and he was part of the SDS, and he reminded us about that he had a right-winger plant that was the most violent person in their group, and it turned out that he was a plant. And again,
it wasn't just a plant; he was a state cop.
Oh, even worse. Well, and then even going into like to the staging of these fake riots, like at UC, what happened at UC Berkeley. I believe, I kind of believe what Robert Reich was saying with how these people were, dressed.
Well, Robert Reich was there, and he's a professor at UC Berkeley, and he said that the guys who pulled on the black masks and started beating everything up were these, like, roid rage guys. They were all pumped up with brush cuts, and they were, but keep in mind, Milo, who was supposed to speak there for the Republican Club, has a book coming out this week. This week, the book dropped, and that riot on the UC Berkeley campus by what I think were probably right-wingers, that riot moved that book to #1 on Amazon, guaranteeing Milo a nice income and getting the message of the book out far and wide. And he's the new fair-haired boy over at Breitbart. So
look at these they were like these pro-gun demonstrations or whatnot. I believe it was down in the Southwest, and you'd have these peaceful, not whatever, just conscious, be conscious of gun law people. I don't want to call them anti-gun, but then you have these by my cold dead hands guys, and that's the same guys that were taking their masks off at UC Berkeley. You see, they have they're all strapped down to the nines, as they say, and they're standing there with their guns and their protests with their it's nuts. And so I think it's leading to like
it's the Bundy Boys all over again.
Yeah, it's the Bundy Boys, and it's leading to kind of if you take it back to I hate to refer to it, but back to Germany with all the these volunteer groups, these brown shirts. I mean, these people, the groups, what was it? The Southern Poverty Law Center said that the number of groups that grew since the day after President Obama was elected or something was exponential.
Yeah.
So these people are all they're the
oh my God, we got a black president. Time to mobilize. Yes, you're absolutely right. Nick, I got to move along, but you said it very well. Thank you very much for the call. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's up?
Hey, Tom, you mentioned right-wing extremists versus left-wing extremists.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about through the 20th century how black people were hanged, lynched, and then you have Latinos beat up in Houston by City of Houston cops in 1977, Jose Campos Torres. Think about dragging live black people behind pickup trucks, Vidor, Texas, a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Train conductors running over Vietnam protesters so their legs are removed, and if they didn't get any help in time, they would have bled to death. The police nearby didn't offer any ambulance help. How about physically intimidating black people at the polling place? Chicago and New York City police torturing black citizens as well as white protesters. The list is endless. And what does our side look like? Oh yeah, we torch a few brand new gas guzzling vehicles at our dealership at night. Or how about the meticulous?
Well, I'm not even sure that that's our side, Johnny. I don't think any genuine lefty in America condones violence. I really don't. I get it that there are anarchists out there who think that we need to just burn down the system and start over again. They're not on the left. That's part of the right. The whole thing of the right is the ends justify the means. Violence is an acceptable political tool. That is not part of the dialogue that's happening on the left in the United States. And frankly, I don't think it ever has been. In fact, I was in SDS when Weatherman split off, and we were horrified. And, it was like, how do we disassociate ourselves from these people? And SDS was considered radical back then. And it just started out as a social justice movement. I mean, it morphed into an anti-war movement. But I get your...
what I don't hear, Tom?
What?
I don't hear how nowadays when people refer to the Weather Underground, not you particularly, but I'm talking about other media, they don't mention the fact that the Weather Underground, they went through painful, meticulous, careful planning to blow up a few federal buildings at the height of the Vietnam War after their government refused to listen to them and refused to stop making war. They planned not to kill anybody, okay?
Yeah, but they did kill people, Johnny, and so we can't excuse that.
Look, that's just collateral damage.
Yeah, no, Johnny. I mean, they did kill people, and you can't excuse that. There's no excuse for killing people.
I'm not aware of the Weather Underground doing that.
Yeah, they did. They killed more of themselves than they killed of other people. but I know of at least one person who was killed by the SDS, who was, I think he was a building guard or something like that. But yeah, I mean, they went out of their way not to attack buildings when they were occupied. But that doesn't give them, some kind of moral high ground in my mind. It's the left in America is showing up with protest signs and pussy hats, and the right is showing up with AK-47s or AR-14s or AR-15s and violence. I mean, it's happening all over the country. Look at the mosque shooting up in Canada that our president won't speak about. Johnny, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a minute. And welcome back. Vicky in Mondovi, Wisconsin. Hey, Vicky. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. You asked a little bit earlier about who would say that left-leaning people are killers and want to kill the conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the perfect time to say that because conservatives or ultra-right-leaners have a ready and willing audience who want to believe that and want it to be correct. The facts be inconsequential or alternative.
Yeah, what really concerns me about this kind of language is it's essentially when you tell somebody that a particular political faction wants to kill them, and then you say, you know what to do. Well, what do you do if somebody's trying to kill you? I mean,
well,
isn't that an invitation to kill the other person?
Possible.
I'm sorry, Vicky. We spoke over each other. What did you say?
I said I would try to. I'm losing you.
You would try to what?
I would try to defend myself any way possible, or I would take them out first.
Yeah, and that's my concern is that this kind of rhetoric is going to lead to somebody frankly trying to shoot me as I walk out of my radio studio, and I do get death threats. It really concerns me. Vicky, thank you very much for the call. It's very well said. Brian in Loyalton, California. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind? Thank you for watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, Tom. First-time caller. Thank you for having me on the show.
Sure.
I wanted to address some of the rhetoric that Trump is using in regard to the Holocaust memorial. Nobody's talking about the actual early warning signs of fascism that is on the placard in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And there's some really, really powerful notes there that we should be taking attention to. Powerful and continuing nationalism.
Disdain for human rights.
Identification of our enemies as a unifying cause to kill and hate.
Supremacy of the military.
Yeah, rampant sexism, controlled mass media.
Obsession with national security.
Religion and government intertwined. That's ridiculous.
Corporate power protected. We have the same list here.
It's gone.
Your turn.
Elections, I mean, does anybody see the parallels?
Yeah, labor power suppressed, disdain for intellectuals in the arts, obsession with crime and punishment.
A right or left-wing individual to understand that we are under a tyrant's dictatorship right now.
Well,
and we have got to crawl out.
We're under a wannabe tyrant's dictatorship right now.
Yeah,
he's complaining about the fact that the courts won't go along with him. He's complaining about the fact that we won't go along with him, that people are protesting, that people didn't actually vote for him. He's complaining about these things.
Yeah, but that is the more trying to arouse and incite the fear and anger within us, because truly we are a people of love.
Yeah. What I find amazing
that as our true cause, then we leave everything behind.
Yeah, I don't disagree. What I find amazing is that the Trump administration has gone to great lengths to be sure and share 74 I think it was they published this morning different terror attacks around the world, but they were all by Muslims. And they didn't mention any of the terror attacks done by right-wingers against Jews, against Muslims, against gay people, against black people, against liberals. I mean, they didn't mention any of it. That boggles my mind. Brian, thank you for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Christine in Farmerville, Louisiana, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Christine, what's up?
Hartmann, have you lost your mind today? Oh, my gosh, you've made me so mad.
Oh, really? Why? How? What?
Okay, so I'm listening to you with this caller that's trying to, I don't know, romanticize, I guess, I would say, the Weather Underground.
Yeah.
And
I'm having none of
and
it.
all of that, okay?
Yeah.
I was listening to this segment, this little conversation. Yeah. And what I hear you say was they were just trying to get attention.
No,
okay?
I didn't say that.
Now,
I
I'm
said,
52 years
no, wait a
old.
second,
I'm
Christine.
52 years old.
Wait a second,
Yes.
Christine. I did not say that. Or if I did, you're taking it out of context. What I said is there's no excusing what the Weather Underground did. That they were using violence. Those are tactics of the right, not the left. There is no excuse for what the Weather Underground did.
But prior to that, you had said that they were the reason why they were doing it was it was an anti-war protest, which it was.
It was.
And an anti-war protest. It turned into an anti-war protest. And they did blow up buildings, although be it they didn't want to do it with people inside the buildings. But, yes, people did die. But you also said in that context that they were trying to get attention to their cause.
Right.
All right. Now, that's what's happening right now with these progressive, and it's not right wing folks and I'm not right wing. I voted for Bill and I voted for Al Gore, and I hated Bush. But when everything started going more towards socialism, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I've seen this happen before. I'm an Air Force brat. I've seen all this happen before. So I kind of backed off of that, and I'm an independent.
Oh, wait a minute. You grew up in the Air Force? You grew up in one of the most socialist institutions in the United States. You were provided free health care. You were provided free food. You were provided free clothing. You were provided free housing. And
now, free housing, yes. And free medical, yes. My mom and daddy had to buy our clothes.
Yeah.
We had to buy our
well,
food.
that's right. You were children.
My mom and daddy were of modest means.
But if they were in the military, their clothes were provided. So you grew up in one of the most socialist institutions in the United States. Nobody, to the best of my knowledge, on the contemporary American left is suggesting that America should be even close to as socialist as the Air Force is.
Right, but we were brought up with respect, and we had to stop at 5 o'clock and face the flag. There's certain things on the military.
Yeah, respect is a good thing.
Way to be brought up.
Patriotism's a good thing.
And even in the beginning, I believed in Hillary Clinton's message of it takes a village because of that upbringing. Okay, I understand that mentality, but right now what we're seeing going on in our youth and in our society. Now, the Bundys stood up for their stuff over there against
Bundy stood up for their right to steal from you and me, Christine.
That is right-wing. What was that? What was that, Mark?
Yeah, it's Tom is my name. The Bundys stood up for their right to steal from you and me. They had, Clive and Bundy for decades had been illegally grazing his cattle on federal lands, and it was a protected watershed. He was ruining the land. And finally, the federal government said, you can't graze there, but there are other lands where you can graze, and the fee is like $3 a cow per or whatever it was. It's like 1/10 of what it is if you're doing it on private land. And Clive and Bundy was like, no, I want to steal from the federal government. And
no, but their family had been there for how many years? Generations upon generations, doing the same thing and providing a service to the American people.
No, I'm sorry, Christine, I'm not buying it. Thieves are thieves. Clive and Bundy was a thief. He was not a patriot. He was a thief. He tried to conceal his thievery by wrapping himself in the flag. But he's in federal court right now.
He is.
Nobody is buying it. The guy is a thief.
Today was Tom.
And he's not a conservative. He doesn't respect the public order. He doesn't respect authority. They were training guns on police officers. That's not something that people who respect the rule of law do.
But the Second Amendment.
does not give you the right to point a gun at a police officer and back them off when the police officer is merely enforcing the law. Christine, if we're going to talk over each other, it's not going to work. Thank you for the call. Mike in Lady Lake, Florida. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to ask you, okay, I keep having the same conversation with many very good people. I know a lot of people, they're business people, things like that, and you inevitably get in to what's going on, and then you find out whether they're a Trump person. But they will go on about how bad Barack Obama was, how bad Hillary would be. But as soon as you begin to talk at all about Trump, you were shut down, or you start to raise their anger. You know, their face turns red, the vein pops out in the head, the eyes start to bulge, and they start to spit. So, I mean, how do we have a conversation? You know, they won't even give us the respect. I mean, well, they sure don't like if they're cut down. And
I know a bunch of Trump supporters. I mean, I just people that live near me, and they're reasonable people. I think the vast majority of people who voted for Donald Trump are not haters. They're not. Maybe not the vast majority, but the majority are not bigots. They voted for Donald Trump because they were tired of neoliberalism, frankly, both Republican neoliberalism and Democratic Party neoliberalism. They were tired of so-called free trade. They were tired of nation building, of this global agenda. They genuinely want jobs to come back to the United States. These are not things that I mean, these are things that I support. And, that I would say that Trump borrowed from the populist left. I keep saying, Donald Trump won the Republican primary because he ran as a Democrat. He said George W. Bush was the worst president in history. He said it again to Bill O'Reilly, 2 or 3 days ago, the whole killers comment. And he said, look at what we did in Iraq, suggesting that, blood was on George W. Bush's hands, which is true. So, but, I don't think that we can. I don't think that it advances our conversation to say the kind of things that Kurt Schlichter was saying about us, about them. It just doesn't.
Well, what I try to do is just say, okay, forget all ideology or whatever. Just as a person, how can you like Donald Trump when he says things about grabbing women by their genitals and all the other things and stiffing little private, little mom and pop businesses? Now, I will say I actually did get threatened by a guy in a conversation that basically he would like to kill me because I'm a liberal. Mm-hmm. It was the night after the weekend that happened, the Pulse incident happened. I went and attended the first vigil they had at Dr. Phillips in downtown Orlando. Walked into a nice little bar to go to the restroom and get something to eat. And this guy, he was pretty well drunk, but he and his buddy, they got on at the end because I was liberal. He said, when Trump gets elected, we're going to finally take care of people like you pointed his finger at me. Yeah. So,
Trump is an authoritarian leader, and there is a strong strain of authoritarianism. And John Dean and his book, Conservatives Without a Conscience, which was based on the book The Authoritarians, if that's right, there's about 20% of the population that just is waiting to say, Sieg Heil, it's a hail victory. Yeah. Yes, indeed. And in fact,
I remember heard some terrible things that people said. I was at a store and heard a couple of guys, and it was a hunting store. One of the guys talked about what he would like to have done to Hillary Clinton, and I wouldn't.
Yeah. No, I had the same. I had a similar experience back in 2009. My brother and I went into a gun shop in Mason, Michigan, and a guy there was, and President Obama had just been inaugurated, and the guy was talking about what he wanted to do to Obama, and he was going to get some Obama targets for the shooting range, blah 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 blah. It was pretty grim. I get it, Mike. I get it. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club with Thom Hartmann University. The book we're reading today is The American Revolution of 1800, written by Dan Sisson with a little bit of help from me and mostly edited by me. I wrote a foreword for it. But it's an absolutely brilliant history of the election of Thomas Jefferson and the times. So reading from chapter 1, page 9, starting out, a quote from Thomas Paine, "For it is the nature and intention of a constitution to prevent governing by party." Oh, really? So often in the past century, the political history of America reveals a paralysis in the highest levels of our government. Legislation fails to pass, budgets are voted down, compromise seems impossible, and the problems of the nation are neither addressed nor solved. There have been brief periods, of course, when this was not the case. The New Deal is usually held up as an example of a time when American politicians actually came together to fundamentally transform the nature and the political landscape of our country. But in the generations since then, more often than not, we've seen gridlock rather than collaboration. Conventional wisdom says that's the way it should be. The founders of this country, the men who wrote the Constitution, wanted there to be a loyal opposition to serve as a balance against excessive power in the hands of any one political party or even president. That's conventional wisdom. Not only is that not true, but this pervasive myth has done considerable harm to our nation and continues to do so. The men in power from 1790 to 1801 did not even remotely conceive of the modern two-party system. In fact, the opposite is true. They wish to consolidate and perpetuate a one-party system in politics in the United States, and were successful in their lifetimes. The terms party and faction have had such a long history that they were widely assumed by American statesmen to be part of human nature. This, at least, was the approach taken by the two men most responsible for establishing the theoretical guidelines of the early republic, the early American Republic. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton attempted to analyze the terms in light of their influence on the political system. Their Federalist essays presented an analysis of party and faction that is more than consistent with the history of the terms we've reviewed. Madison referred to the violence of faction as a dangerous vice characteristic of free governments. By faction, Madison wrote, "I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community." In other words, faction is anti-America. He continued, "The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere." Thus, party, as Madison understood it, was not something of recent origin. Parties have been around since the beginning of man. And he noted, quote, "The most numerous party, or in other words, the most powerful faction, must be expected to prevail." He ends his analysis on this note: "To secure the public good and provide rights against the danger of such a faction, that is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed." Thus, Madison captured the essence of the term faction and party as they were understood by his contemporaries. The faction and party were inescapably rooted in human nature and produced violence, zeal, animosity, oppression, and danger, all adverse to the interests of the community. He added, quote, "Men of factious tempers or of local prejudices or of sinister designs may by intrigue, by corruption, or by other means first obtain the suffrages, the vote, and then betray the interests of the people." His conclusion is that factions must be broken and controlled. They are at all costs not to be legitimately recognized or encouraged. Madison was not alone in his aversion to faction and party. Alexander Hamilton, too, warns the reader, quote, Ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives, not more laudable than these, were typical of that intolerant spirit which has at all times characterized political parties. End of quote. Registering his disgust for faction, Hamilton continued, "It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy." Hamilton, we might note, connects ancient history with modern America. The tempestuous situation, he writes, from which Massachusetts has scarcely emerged, he was talking about Shays' Rebellion, evinces the dangers of this kind are not merely speculative. Who could determine what might have been the issue of her late convulsions if the malcontents had not been headed by a Caesar or a Cromwell? End of quote. In Federalist number 77, he describes the influence of faction and party intrigue, connections, and, quote, personal influence in government in a way that was characteristic of the terms from classical times through the age of Robert Walpole. Hamilton wrote, "Every mere council of appointment, however constituted, will be a conclave in which cabal and intrigue will have their full scope. And as each member will have his friends and connections to provide for, the desire of mutual gratification will beget a scandalous bartering of votes and bargaining for places." What is worth noting here is not only Hamilton's description of the influence of party and faction upon an administration, but his general description of politics. He's describing the politics of England for the previous century and a half. Moreover, he understands that encouraging party and faction at the theoretical as well as the practical level guaranteed that the emergent system of American politics would be propelled into the futile violence and dissension that had plagued every republic in history. Throughout the remainder of his political career, Hamilton reserved a special contempt for parties. The American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson and Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Tim Carr, the Senior Director of Strategy at the Free Press and Free Press Action Fund, the website freepress.net. You can tweet him at Tim Carr, K-A-R-R, or at Free Press. Tim, welcome to the program. Welcome back to the program.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good. So I read this piece in the New York Times last night by Cecilia Kang titled Trump's FCC pick quickly targets net neutrality rules. Whoa, this guy's moving at the speed of light. Tell us about it.
Well, I think he's taken a play from the Donald Trump book and decided to try to get as much done as early as possible. This is the new chairman of the FCC, Ajit Pai. He was appointed by Trump, but he's been at the FCC for a number of years. He's served as a commissioner, so we know a little bit about his positions and his priorities. And prior to coming to the FCC, he was actually a lawyer for Verizon, and his loyalties to the phone companies, his loyalties to the cable industry are very strong, and those are reflected in most of all of the policy positions that he takes. They favor the phone and cable industry very often,
over
not
consumers.
To the benefit of consumers, exactly.
Yeah,
so
to the detriment of consumers.
He's someone we need to look out for.
So you're suggesting that apparently Ajit Pai is following the rest of the Trump administration's dicta that you just walk up to them and grab them by the law that you want to change, rule that you want to change, whatever.
Well, yeah, it's a sort of this rejection of due process. What
right.
he is,
if you're powerful, they'll let you get away with it.
Yeah, and what he did in the just last week was he on Friday afternoon in a classic, what's known in Washington as a Friday news dump. He had a number of items released at the FCC that basically rolled back some of the advances that were made by his predecessor, Tom Wheeler, who was Obama's FCC chairman, who was a champion of issues like net neutrality, but not just net neutrality. He also was a champion of getting cheaper, affordable access to more people. He he created rules that protected the privacy of internet users. So a lot of those advances under the prior FCC chair are now rapidly being rolled back by the new chairman, Ajit Pai.
So if net neutrality goes away, does that mean that if I say something to anger Comcast and that they can simply decide that ThomHartmann.com is going to be delivered to people's home more slowly than most other websites?
Well, there would be, without the net neutrality protections that are now in place, if you take those away, there is nothing to stop your internet access provider from discriminating in favor of content that it likes and against content that it does not like.
In other words, you become like communist China.
Yeah, well, if you talk about
except Comcast, it's corporate.
It's corporate, yes. Comcast, for example, is not just interested in providing people with a high-speed internet connection. They also own NBC Universal. NBC Universal has a number of content properties, as people know, and so there would be a business incentive there for them to favor NBC products over news and information that might come from smaller independent organizations and competitors.
Right. And what about the slicing and dicing of the internet? I mean, I remember, excuse me, back a couple of years ago when we went through this whole thing when we were trying to convince Tom Wheeler to put the internet under Title II of the Telecommunications Code. In other words, consider it a public utility. That there were these graphics that were put together. I think you guys at Free Press did one. As I recall, we had you on television about this, or on radio, where it was like, okay, it was a graphic that showed sort of like the way that you buy cable TV. Oh, you want basic internet access? That's $35. You want domestic news sites? That's an extra $5 a month. You want international news sites? That's an extra $10 a month. You want streaming video? That's an extra $15 a month. You want porn? That's $20 a month. And they basically slice and dice the internet. And it wasn't so much a thing about ideology as it was about just figuring out how to maximize the income to the ISPs from the internet. But without net neutrality, we could have both, right? I mean, we could have both a slice and diced internet, so it's sort of the cable model, the cable TV model, and they could slow down freepress.net, for example, if they don't like what you're saying. Well,
yeah, I mean, this is the internet is become much more sophisticated now. That it's not just surfing websites. Obviously, we're using it to talk via applications like Skype. We're using it to listen to music. There are companies like Netflix that a lot of people use to watch television and movies. And the internet service providers are also in the business of providing you with telephone connections, and they're in the business of streaming and selling movies in both, in theaters and online. So they have this, again, natural incentive to try to take control of this open network and shut out the competitors to their own benefit. So we, when Tom Wheeler put in place Title II protections, net neutrality protections, that was very important for those of us who want the internet to be this open network that basically puts power of choice in the hands of internet users. We can choose what services we want, what news organizations we want to watch, listen to, read, without our ISP making that determination.
Well, Wheeler was making these decisions through a process that was public, that was transparent, and invited public comments. And in fact, I would say arguably through efforts of people like you, Tim Carr with freepress.net, he received, what, over 1 million comments saying, I want net neutrality?
Actually, the proceeding on net neutrality FCC, they received nearly 4 million comments.
4 million. Okay, so Ajit Pai is not doing that. He's not asking for comments. He's not doing it in a transparent and small d democratic way. He's simply basically ruling by decree. What are the odds that he's going to just strike down Title II and just say, okay, that's it, end of conversation? And is there anything we can do?
Well, it's going to be more difficult for him to do that because the rule that we won was challenged by the telcos in the court. We've won in the courts. We won at the FCC. It's based on congressional law that was bipartisan and passed, the Telecommunications Act of 1996. So he may try to rule by decree, but in this case, it's not going to be as easy. A more likely scenario would be that some of Trump's allies in Congress, the GOP-controlled Congress, will try to introduce legislation that would take away net neutrality protections. And that's a fight that we have to be ready for.
And you know the banner they're going to use to do that? Fake news. We've got to do something about fake news.
Well, yes. And I'm sure the legislation that they introduced will have a name like the Internet Freedom Act. They will try to cloak killing net neutrality in this type of jargon.
Yeah, it's astonishing. So back to the question, we're talking with Tim Carr, freepress.net, about, you know, what this whole thing with internet net neutrality. What can people who are watching or listening to this program right now do?
Well, you can go to freepress.net. We have a lot of actions for people who have been very active over there. We've been working on this issue for 10 years. So we have a base of about 1 million people there. We're very active, and whenever a threat comes up like this, we'll send emails and give them all sorts of tools that they can contact other members of Congress or go to the FCC or even organize when they're within their own communities to build strong local support for net neutrality.
Is now the time to be doing that, or do we wait until Ajit Pai does something even more outrageous?
Well, you can go to freepress.net at any time, obviously, and there are ways you can sign up there. If you want to be notified when those moments occur, and they will undoubtedly come, you know, we'll have your name, we'll have your email. We won't bombard you with emails, but we will let you know when the time is right to act.
Sounds like a plan. Tim Carr, Senior Director of Strategy at Free Press and the Free Press Action Fund. Freepress.net is the website. You can tweet him at Tim Carr, K-A-R-R, or at Free Press. Tim, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great talking. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Glenna in Rochester, New York. Hey, Glenna. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hi there. I'm wondering, I don't know if somebody brought this up yesterday because I wasn't able to listen to you yesterday, but I saw something very disturbing over the weekend watching CNN and also MSNBC. There were commercials that, first I thought they were a joke. They were things saying, call your senator and give support for, there were 3, I can only remember 2, Betsy DeVos and the pipeline.
Yeah, probably Tom Price and Scott Pruitt, it would be my guess.
It was, you know, and nobody ever mentioned it. I thought it was a joke or something, and
No, there's these pop-up groups. There was one, Committee 45. We're seeing the same ads here in Washington, D.C., and there's a cycle of 2 or 3 of the different ads, and there's 2 or 3 different organizations. And I went to SourceWatch, which, you know, takes the IRS filings of these right-wing and left-wing groups and reveals who is running them, basically. And none of the names were in there. In other words, these were organizations that have been created just in the last few months. They've gotten really good at this, these billionaires. You know, they'll create an organization, they'll fund it with $1 million or so, or a couple million, whatever it takes, you know, for a campaign. They'll do the campaign, and then they'll collapse the organization, kill it off, and start a new one. And so it's like you're continually playing whack-a-mole, even trying to know where the message is coming from. But they're trying, you know, they're trying to do the same thing they did with the Tea Party, where, you know, these $300,000 buses were showing up, you know, all painted with Tea Party colors, and, you know, busing people to rallies where, you know, paid events and all this kind of stuff. And where'd all that money come from? Oh yeah, it came from front groups funded by the Koch brothers and others. And they're trying to create this sense of, this AstroTurf sense of you know, public opinion. Or they're trying to, you know, validate Republicans' votes, and yeah, it's pretty startling.
Well, a couple of things that entered my mind. First of all, you know, it's brilliant, obviously, to do it on those channels where your audience is going to be up in arms about it. But then my second thought was the number that they give to call the senator. Mm-hmm. You know, knowing that the people watching that are going to get mad and call the senator and say, no, I don't want this. I'm wondering if that number rings into a yes line.
The way it works, I can tell you what, if they're putting an 800 number up, or an 866 or 877 or whatever, when you have those numbers, it's automatic caller ID, and a record is kept. We used to have an 800 number here. We did for like the first 10 or 12 years of the show. and until pretty much everybody got unlimited minutes, and we would get every month a list from the phone company, which you don't get with just a regular phone number, of the name and phone number of everybody who had called in. So that's something that can be sold. Right. So if you call one of these toll-free numbers that simply then links you to 202-225-3121 to the congressional switchboard or to a particular senator's office, if you call one of those numbers, you're basically giving your phone number and name to the organization that ran the ad. And
because I was kind of thinking, with the deluge of calls that they've had, I was wondering if they have one number that rings into yes, I support it, and one that rings into no, so that then they can say all these people call and support it.
I guarantee you that they know which ones came from MSNBC and which ones came from CNN and which ones came from Fox, that they have different numbers for those three. I mean, that's just telemarketing 101. It's basic advertising. Figure out where your advertising is working, sort of stuff. Glenna, but I believe that in many cases they're simply harvesting names for resale, as well as doing their right-wing agenda. Thanks, Glenna.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day,
every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us
raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Thom Hartmann here with you. Welcome back. A lot going on today. This Betsy DeVos has been installed as the this, by the way, this has never happened before in the history of the republic. The vice president has never had to break a tie over a presidential cabinet appointment. Never happened before. This is the lowest common denominator. This is the depths to which the Trump administration has fallen. This I mentioned this piece by Cecilia Kang in the New York Times. This is in the February 5th paper. The headline is Trump's FCC pick quickly targets net neutrality rules. And Cecilia writes, in his first days as President Trump's pick to lead the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai has aggressively moved to roll back consumer protection regulations created during the Obama presidency. And whenever we have the word regulation, it's always useful to put the words consumer protection before them, because 95% of the time, a regulation is a consumer protection. Mr. Pai took a first swipe at net neutrality rules, she writes, designed to ensure equal access to content on the internet. He stopped 9 companies from providing discounted high-speed internet service to low-income individuals. He withdrew an effort to keep prison phone rates down, and he scrapped a proposal to break open the cable box market. In total, as the chairman of the FCC, Mr. Pai released about a dozen actions in the last week, many buried in the agency's website and not publicly announced, stunning consumer advocacy groups and telecom analysts. I'm telling you, Trump laid this out to Billy Bush. You just walk up to them and grab them by the laws that you don't like. Just change things. You just, Hitler called it a blitzkrieg, which is not to say that Trump is Hitler. But it's, the sudden, well, George W. Bush called it shock and awe. It's you just roll into town and just bang, 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 bang. We're going to get this stuff done. We're going to change this stuff. It's going to happen, whether you like it or not. By the way, have you been following this thing with Melania Trump and her lawsuit? This is absolutely fascinating. The Daily Mail last year published an article suggesting that Melania Trump had been an escort, shall we say. Well, that was the word that they used, so I'll just leave it at that.
And she has sued them for $150 million, saying that by suggesting that she was an escort when she first came here. And frankly, having looked around, I have not seen any evidence of that. There is, I've seen a fair amount of evidence that she was working without a work permit, that she was to use Donald Trump's phrase, illegal alien or illegal immigrant. But, that's about as close to anything as I've seen that, seems fairly well substantiated. And even that, I don't know that to be a fact. I've simply seen it reported in a number of places. But in any case, she's suing the Daily Mail for $150 million for defamation. Now, for a defamation suit, you have to demonstrate that you've been harmed. And so the court went to her and said, okay, how have you been harmed? By their saying that you used to be an escort. I mean, other than just, reputational, is there actually, what justifies a $150 million fine? As opposed to, $1,000 fine and a slap on the wrist for saying something you shouldn't have said. What justifies $150 million? Well, this is what her lawyers submitted, according to a report from the New York Post, Rupert Murdoch's newspaper. This is what her lawyers submitted when they said, this is how Mrs. Trump was harmed. And I quote, plaintiff had a unique once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as an extremely famous and well-known person. That would be as First Lady of the United States. That's not what they said. I just inserted that, just to be clear. Back to the filing. As an extremely famous and well-known person, plaintiff had a unique once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as an extremely famous and well-known person to launch a broad-based commercial brand in multiple product categories, each of which could have garnered multi-million-dollar business relationships for a multi-year term, during which plaintiff is one of the most photographed women in the world. These product categories would have included, among other things, apparel, accessories, shoes, jewelry, cosmetics, hair care, skin care, and fragrance. You get this? Melania Trump, apparently is asserting that she was defamed and hurt to the tune of $150 million because she couldn't use this window in time when she would be one of the most photographed women in the world, a quote from her lawsuit. In other words, the First Lady, she couldn't use that to launch a line of apparel, accessories, shoes. And they're planning to cash in on being First Lady? I mean, this is, weirdly enough, the book Clinton Cash and all this stuff, this is what conservatives were accusing Hillary Clinton of, that, I think it's hard to, and frankly, the book was debunked. I mean, it was the most that Hillary Clinton got out of being First Lady, I think, was, well, and a senator, was the ability to charge for speeches, which everybody does. But launching a $150 million line of clothing as First Lady? Or maybe they meant after she gets out of the White House. It doesn't say. But it's kind of strange. We'll see where this goes. Anyway, it's just fascinating, the whole thing. The whole Trump show is fascinating. We'll be back with your calls right after this. Stick around. It's 28.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Global warming storms in New Orleans causing giant hurricanes. The beat goes on. We'll be back. But the sales pitch that the Nazis put forward in the early 30s was that the Jews were a people apart. That was I forget how it's said in German, but a people apart. That they lived in their own communities, that they dressed differently, that they spoke differently. They spoke Yiddish rather than German, which is kind of a hodgepodge mixture of. It's sort of like down in Louisiana where it's Creole, sort of half French, half English. Yiddish is half Hebrew, half German, or not half and half. It's actually more German. But that was his sales pitch. These people aren't actually Germans, and so therefore we should get rid of them. And Donald Trump, even when yes, he talks about quote illegal immigrants, but he has also on a number of occasions, and certainly his surrogates and his buddies talk about things like we're losing our cultural identity, and why are we having Cinco de Mayo celebrations, and why are people flying the Mexican flag on May 5th, and this kind of stuff. And it's that people apart pitch. And if those people are visibly different from the white European norm, and Hispanics are in this country, as many Jews were in Europe, then this A goes to B, B goes to C, C goes to D, and it's like from Milton Mayer's book. He pointed out, if you knew that when you got to D, when A went to B, if you knew that B was going to lead to D, then you would have stopped it. But you didn't know. So you get these incremental steps, step by step, until pretty soon it's like everything has changed around you. I wish I had a printout of Milton Mayer's book. I've done it many times on this show, where he went back and he talked to these Nazis, or people who had lived through Hitler's Germany and just didn't do anything. They just, normal people who held jobs all through the whole thing, through the war and everything. And this one guy said, please believe me, it happened incrementally, gradually, and everything, all these emergency measures were said to be for reasonable purposes. And he said, one day it's like the corn growing. One day it's over your head and you don't realize it. And that's what I see happening. Max, this is, thank you, Shano, for printing this out. Shane grabbed They Thought They Were Free, is the book by Milton Mayer. The subtitle is The Germans, 1933 to 1945. Milton Mayer was a reporter for the Chicago Sun, as I recall, and he went over to Germany and spent a fair amount of time there talking to these various people. And one of them, this fellow was a member of the, he was a professor, a college professor, and he just taught college all through the war, right? And not politics or anything like that. He says, to live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me. Unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity, than most of us ever had the occasion to develop. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained for, or on occasion regretted, that unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood what the whole thing was in principle, but all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to, one no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing, and one day it is over his head. How is this to be avoided among ordinary men, even highly educated ordinary men? Frankly, I do not know. I do not see, even now, many times since it happened, I have pondered that pair of great maxims, principis obsta and finem respis, resist the beginnings and consider the end. But one must foresee the end in order to resist or even see the beginnings. One must foresee the end clearly and certainly. And how is this to be done by ordinary men or even extraordinary men? Things might have, and everyone counts on that might. Your little men, your Nazi friends, we're not against national socialism in principle. Men like me who are the great offenders not because we knew better, and that would be too much to say, but because we sensed better. Pastor Niemöller spoke for the thousands and thousands of men like me when he spoke too modestly of himself and said that when the Nazis attacked the communists, he was a little uneasy, but after all, he was not a communist, and so he did nothing. And then he attacked the socialists, and he was a little uneasier, but still he was not a socialist, and he did nothing. And then the schools, the press, the Jews, and so on, and he was still always uneasier, but still he did nothing. And then they attacked the church, and he was a churchman, and he did something, but then it was too late. You see, one doesn't exactly, I'm still reading from Milton Mayer's book, They Thought They Were Free. Brilliant book. I mean, if you want to understand World War II and the rise of the Nazis, read this book. He said, you see, one doesn't exactly see where or how to move. Believe me, this is true. Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the next and the next. You wait for one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when the shock comes, will join with you in resisting somehow. You don't want to act or even talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. Why not? Well, you're not in the habit of doing it. It's not just fear of standing alone that restrains you. It's genuine uncertainty. And people say you're an alarmist. Remarkable. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Amazing. It's just there was an amazing story here. This is from the Baltimore Sun. Chris Edelson was writing this thing. I'm saying amazing too much, aren't I? I'll try to say. Anyhow, he said, a week ago, men and women went to work at airports around the United States, as they always do. They showered, got dressed, ate breakfast, perhaps dropped off their kids at school. Then they reported to their jobs as federal government employees, where, according to news reports, one of them handcuffed a 5-year-old child, separated him from his mother, and detained him alone for several hours at Dulles Airport. At least one other federal employee at Dulles reportedly detained a woman who had been traveling with her 2 children, both U.S. citizens, for 20 hours without food. A relative says the mother was handcuffed even when she went to the bathroom and threatened with deportation. Men and women who work for the federal government completed these and other tasks and then returned to their families, where perhaps they had dinner and read stories to their children before bedtime. He says neither Donald Trump nor Steve Bannon personally detained any of the people held at airports over the weekend. They relied on assistance. The men and women who reportedly handcuffed small children and the elderly, separated a child from his mother, and held others without food for 20 hours are undoubtedly ordinary people, in quotes. These are, in normal circumstances, people who likely treat their neighbors and coworkers with kindness and do not intentionally seek to harm others. That is chilling, as it is a reminder that authoritarians have no trouble finding the people they need to carry out their acts of cruelty. They do not need special monsters. They can issue orders to otherwise unexceptional people who will carry them out dutifully. The good Germans, yes. Come to America. Dave in Radcliffe, Kentucky. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I wanted to answer, or at least give you my perspective on what we can do to kind of counter this right-wing projection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was in the Army for 25 years, and I am a lifelong atheist, and I really have no religious sentiment at all. And I ran into a big problem after 2001 because I just don't share a lot of the emotions surrounding this debate over religious differences.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I found. The best, about the only way to really counter this projection is to stay dedicated to all the mundane little facts that people that apply projection, they usually tend to ignore or at least compartmentalize facts, okay? Mm-hmm. And if you are the boring person in the room and you keep reminding them all the time that their facts are wrong, that's the best way to survive. And I mean, I can give a small example, like just a small generic example. If they say there's 49 terrorists in this village, and they get everyone riled up to go, capture or kill them, whatever. But there's only 50 people in the village total. Keep reminding them of that.
Yeah, Dave, I've over the last month, I have reread. I hadn't looked at any of these books in years, but reread part of Hannah Arendt's The Origin of Totalitarianism. Went back to Milton Mayer's They Thought They Were Free. I've been reading Fritz Thyssen's I Funded Hitler, and read part of Mein Kampf. The thing that I thought was fascinating is Hannah Arendt pointed out in her book that when Hitler started telling lies about the Jews and lies about the trade unionists specifically, that the Jewish press and the trade unionists in their newspapers, which were well distributed across Germany, tried to push back on those lies, tried to say, no, that's not true. This is not true. Here's the truth. Here's the facts. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. These people are driven by emotion, and they're whipped up by hate mongers. And I don't have an answer for it, Dave. But I know from I've been debating conservatives on this program for 14 years. You're not going to be able to change their mind with facts if they're committed to what they believe.
Well, here's one. I know every time, even a lot of former military, they say, well, we won in Iraq. You know that. They tell me, you know that. We were in Iraq, or you were in Iraq. You know that we achieved total victory. I say, yeah, it costs $1 trillion for a country that's roughly the size of Indiana.
Right.
And
we produced 5 million refugees, and we killed 100,000 people.
Yes, but if you remind them of the size of it, it tends to disrupt their focus on violence solves everything. That's basically the conclusion they come to.
Yeah,
and
that's a brilliant comeback. $1 trillion, the size of to seize a country the size of Indiana. And by the way, we haven't fully seized it. I mean, we're preparing to take Mosul, or to try to take Mosul right now with Iraqi troops. And our soldiers are going to be relying on Iraqi troops for a lot. And those Iraqi troops have just been told that our president said, if you help us out, you still can't come to the United States. Sorry.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's messed up.
You can't even visit family or friends. You can't do it. This has got to be a terrible thing. I mean, the American soldiers in Iraq have to be scared witless. It's wow.
Yeah. It is messed up. And actually, I don't think it is just Donald Trump that's deluding himself. Michael Flynn was my company commander in advanced individual training. And ironically, he gave me my first Article 15, and it was over religion. And I say that's ironic because...
What is an Article 15?
It's a non-judicial punishment. I got, I had extra duty. It goes on your record, though.
Right.
And that was the most religious time of my life, to tell you the truth. I wanted to be popular. I wanted to be accepted. I mean, this was 20 years ago, okay? Mm-hmm. And it was very tough training at the time. And the only way Mike Flynn would give us a respite was on Sunday if we went to church, okay? And I said, no, I don't want to. And they said, he said, then you're going to have to do work. And one of my jobs was to pick up trash while everybody else was in there praying, okay? And I basically went into a room, an unoccupied room, and went to sleep. Yeah. And I got in trouble for that. And I know Mike Flynn is he's very dedicated to certain philosophical concepts that, to be quite frank and to make it short, I find very dangerous.
Yeah.
They're very troubling and they're very dangerous. And whether or not, I just don't think Donald Trump, and I shouldn't just say Flynn, I also suspect, I just know Flynn. I think Bannon also. They're for lack of a better word, they are, they're just
true believers.
Believe in a certain philosophy that is extremely troubling.
Yeah. I think these guys are true believers. I think that they actually believe their stuff, and Trump has. I mean, he just throughout his life. I mean, he brags about this in Art of the Deal, or at least his ghostwriter did. Has the ability to basically create alternative realities around himself, and it's always worked for him until he became president. And now it's not working. It's blowing up in his face, and he doesn't quite know what to do with it other than yell, fake news, they're hassling me. But, in business, he was always the king. Nobody contradicted him. He would say, the sky is green, and everybody would say, yes, sir, the sky is green. And it was just, and now as president, he can say the sky is green, and the media goes, no, wait a minute, we looked, it's blue. Here's a picture. And he's like, oh, that's fake news. I mean, that's what's happened. And, whether it's happening to Flynn or Bannon, I doubt. But although this Bannon being on the cover of Time magazine, this is going to be interesting. I haven't seen the article yet. But, Dave, thank you for sharing your experience and your story with us. It's fascinating. Thank you very much. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. We'll be back in just a minute. We're going to check in with Talk Media News with Luke Vargas, the New York/UN correspondent for Talk Media News, about what's going on in the world today in about 4 or 5 minutes. And then we'll be picking up more of your calls. And also, we're going to have with us Ali Senger, health policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation, for a third hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Yeah, I said it right. Heritage Foundation. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Beverly in McHenry, Illinois, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Beverly, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Beverly. Take me off speakerphone, please.
I wanted to run a suggestion past you.
Okay.
And I know you're not a legal expert, but this idea of fake news, propaganda, we have so many things going on that I'm nervous about. Is it possible if we could appeal to Congress, and the idea is all or nothing at all for the most part, we got to appeal to our Republicans to maybe pass a law that pulls the reins in on Donald Trump. He thinks he can do anything. He's sticking up his middle finger at the rest of us. And maybe it's a way of saying no, not only to him, but now in this environment, now that we know what social media does, can we write a law that takes it away from the president and his administration so that they don't have Twitter, Facebook, these things they could, and that do impact our democracy, our markets, our businesses, our allies, our military, and mostly protects us from the possibility of propaganda, and puts the White House, because they got a bully pulpit and a means to communicate with us in all kinds of ways, like the press briefings and interviews. But it should go through the journalists and people that can hold him a little bit accountable. Do you think anything like that would be possible? That we use...
I got what you said, Beverly. No, I don't. For two reasons. Number one, the Republicans control the House and Senate, and they would never do anything to restrict the powers of their president. And number two, I think it's kind of essentially un-American, isn't it, to say that we want to take away the means of communication from anybody? You want to take away Donald Trump's Twitter? I mean, he's entitled to it. It's sort of a free country.
Well, it is, but I thought maybe in the case of a president, because look what he does with our markets, either on purpose or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe he's saying to Mike Pence, hey, short Boeing, I'm going to tweet about them. But I doubt it. I think he's just, running on impulse and like that and living in the Twitter sphere. And the thing that I think is most interesting, Beverly, is that this is the first 3 weeks in the 70 years that Donald Trump has been alive, with the possible exception of when he went to military school, when anybody has said to him, no, Donald, you can't. And, he's had, I believe, hundreds of businesses fail, at least dozens of businesses fail, because they were dumb ideas. And nobody ever said, Donald, that's a dumb idea. Everybody said, yes, sir, yes, sir. Throw some money into it. Well, and he's not dealing with it well at all. And, he's imagining enemies where actually what he has is just, simple resistance. He's getting hysterical, using the term in the Freudian context. And it concerns me. This is the guy who's got his finger on the button, although he seems to think that his biggest enemies are in the United States, not other nuclear powers. But anyway, it's Beverly, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 12 minutes. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and free-don.org, which, by the way, might happen this week. We'll see. But with us from New York is Luke Vargas. Hey, Luke, welcome back.
Hey, good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. So it is day 18 of the Trump administration, and you note that the State Department remains eerily silent. So what is going on with American diplomacy?
Well, not very much. I'd say you could take the word public diplomacy out of most of the State Department's work in this administration so far. Day 18 now, 0 press briefings since the new president came into office. This is pretty stunning. I mean, President Obama had authorized his State Department to give briefings on the 3rd day of his presidency back in 2009, and at this point into the administration, they had held 11 of those daily briefings down at Foggy Bottom. So really behind there on the public-facing side of American diplomacy. It's so bad, in fact, that Voice of America, which gets its money from the U.S. government and is often seen as sort of the easiest question in the room when it comes to U.S. officials, wrote a scathing piece on this today and said this is unprecedented. They quoted former U.S. diplomats who basically said, you know, America is not contesting this space anymore in the foreign policy sphere, that, you know, we have noticed in the past few weeks the Islamic State has begun giving something along the lines of a daily briefing, providing news in video form every day now. This person who's quoted by VOA was saying essentially this is ridiculous that there is not some sort of official American government response. And it's not just the public-facing side of things. There is what Bloomberg called a cone of silence right now at the State Department, where we've got no State Department chief of staff. There are 30 undersecretaries of state positions that have not even had someone chosen to man them. Those are posts that deal with counterterrorism, with narcotics.
Do these require Senate vetting?
They will. And we don't even have names. And so this article is speculating it could be midsummer before the State Department is fully staffed. You know, an anecdote about how things are going here at the United Nations. Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's pick to be, well, she's not just the pick, she is now the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, reportedly came in a few days before she started work. She went to the office, the mission here at the United Nations, and looked around and said, okay, we've got a bunch of great staff here. I'm going to put in the request to the administration down in Washington to keep a majority of these staffers with me. And the Trump team said, no, those people are going to be let go. You're going to need to restaff this yourself. So it's sort of a trend we're seeing all across the State Department. There is a report today that Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, and President Trump himself are going to meet with Elliot Abrams. Of course, he served in the Reagan presidency, got tied up in Iran-Contra, giving misinformation.
Boy, did he ever.
And also was seen as sort of the chief architect, or one of the chief architects, of the Iraq war plan, which, of course, Donald Trump says he thought was a bad idea right from the start. So, I mean, suffice it to say, maybe the pressure is getting turned up on the president and on Tillerson, and they feel the need to just fill the State Department bureaucracy with staff, even if they are not ideologically compatible.
You know if they're leftover neocons?
I'm sure they're going to. I mean, they are always on call. The Abrams pick, if indeed he is picked as sort of the chief of staff at this for the Secretary of State, would indicate sort of a turn towards the Jeb Bush cabinet, which featured a lot of those sort of prominent neoconservative foreign policy thinkers, none of whom really was a backer of Donald Trump. Quite the opposite. Abrams, along with many others, was very vocal in opposing Donald Trump, and now they're saying, okay, shoot, well, we have all these roles to fill. Let's go to the people who are looking for jobs and who have done these positions before, even if we don't see eye to eye. So it does seem as if, every day on Twitter, I've been putting up a calendar comparing 2009 and 2017 just on the press briefings front, because I have to say it's fun watching the White House briefings, but the press corps that is at the State Department asking about American foreign policy day in, day out are, I think, the best press corps in the United States, and I cannot wait to see a Trump administration official try to reconcile all these contradictory statements on foreign policy, because as the saying goes, especially in the world of foreign policy, if you have two different contradictory statements, you have no policy at all. So it is probably one of the reasons we haven't seen any of those briefings. It would just be too difficult right now for anybody at the State Department to presume to know what Donald Trump truly thinks about any of these foreign policy issues. So the silence, the cone of silence, at state at least for now, remains in place.
That's amazing. You note that with all the attention focused on the U.S. southern border, there's a growing story on our northern border. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is interesting. It's a story coming today from The Guardian, which is quoting officials in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police who say 22 people walked across the U.S.-Canada border going from south to north over the weekend. This is over in Manitoba, right north of North Dakota. And this is part of a growing trend that people who've been watching this border say has increased a lot since the election, where folks, we don't know if there are any American citizens actually in this cohort, but people who were either looking to try and apply for refugee status in the United States, or people who actually had refugee protection in the United States but no longer feel comfortable here, are trying to cross illegally into Canada and reapply for asylum there. It's an interesting story. We'll have to watch this coming forward, but one of the most interesting parts of this is that there is an agreement between the United States and Canada. It's called the Safe Third Country Act. You can sort of understand this. You see this kind of thing in Europe a lot, which is a law that basically says if you're fleeing from a conflict country and you get to a place that could be considered safe for someone to seek asylum status, you've got to submit your refugee paperwork there. I mean, you can't just, land in Italy and then go to France and Germany and the Netherlands, sort of cherry picking where you have the best chance of getting asylum. The law says if you're safe, stay there. It will be interesting. We've already heard of these 22 people who crossed over the weekend from the U.S. to Canada. 10 of them have already had asylum paperwork fulfilled with court dates scheduled. So very soon, I think
doesn't that suggest that Canada doesn't, or at least the court system in Canada doesn't view the United States as a safe place?
I think it's too early to go to that storyline just yet, because we haven't seen how that argument is going to be made, if it is made in the Canadian court system. But you or I are thinking about the same thing here, because it will be very curious to see if that argument is made, and if these lawyers are trying to argue that the political climate in the United States since this refugee or Muslim ban, vouched for by President Trump, has gone into effect, if the climate really has soured enough that this is no longer considered.
Right. Meanwhile, Canada has stepped up the number of refugees that they're taking, while the United States is trying to block them. And I'm wondering if the Trump administration is thinking that they're going to need a border wall on the north border of the United States to keep those. If they're too dangerous for the United States, do you really want them in Canada, or they could just walk across the border?
We have not heard anything from the Trump administration on that so far. Obviously, I think even if there is if it's good to make that comparison.
Has Trump had a phone call with Justin Trudeau yet?
I think I'm not sure, but I know that that is traditionally the first stop that a U.S. president makes when they become president, and we have not seen that trip really even talked about so far. So,
but things are not normal. Yeah, Canada's liberal. I mean, they've got a national health care system, for God's sake. You can't talk to them. They're commies.
Right. Yes. And he was sort of trolling Trump, as people said. I mean, Justin Trudeau was on Twitter right after that refugee ban was enacted, saying, look, to whatever extent we can, we're going to try and take in people that the U.S. might be rejecting. So certainly striking a different course on this issue than the U.S.
Yeah, it's a very different course, and it's a moral high ground, basically, that Canada's occupying. And, frankly, it embarrasses the United States, in my opinion. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Luke, it's always good talking with you. Thank you so much for coming in today from New York.
Likewise. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. We'll be back. Ali Senger of the Heritage Foundation, a health policy analyst, is going to be with us. We're going to be talking about Obamacare and, what are the Republicans going to do next? Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction, a book about extinction. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in our atmosphere, trapping heat and moisture than ever before in the 165,000-year history of the human race. We are on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a very different place from the one currently cradling us. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, and agricultural collapse, they're all taking place right now. And it's going to get worse. But now other voices have entered the fray. Those of geologists who study the longer-term implications and histories of a planet undergoing rapid global warming. Specifically, they are focused on extinctions. The climate scientists, geologists, and those from related scientific disciplines need to continue talking to each other because at some point we may be able to see the critical moment in which the current climate crosses from the realm of a global destabilizer to a global extinction event. We must wake up. It's hard to imagine life without Earth. We take the vast variety of life on this planet and even our own existence for granted. But numerous times in our planet's history, life as we know it has come close to disappearing entirely. We call these events mass extinctions, and we even teach school children about those times of great death on our planet. For example, we know that long ago, on a much more unstable planet, the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid striking the Earth. This leads many people to believe that as long as we don't see an asteroid hurtling toward the planet, all is well. But this is not rational thinking for several reasons. The asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs and started a major mass extinction is the only event having to do with outer space that we can trace with any certainty. And new science indicates that the asteroid impact itself wasn't what killed the dinosaurs. It was the global warming that followed it. New science has discovered a common theme in all of the extinctions in the past, and it's woven right into the global fabric of today as yet another mass extinction threatens our planet. That global consistent thread is global warming. We have had 6 extinctions in the billion-year history of life on our planet. Each sharp spike in the chart below indicates one of these mass extinctions. There's a chart on the page. Occurring about 450 million years ago, the Ordovician/Silurian mass extinction devastated marine life, which at the time dominated the planet. In a series of 2 extinctions, 60% and 70% of all life on the planet was taken, respectively. Then, fewer than 100 million years later, the planet was rocked again. The Denovian period was capped off by a 20 million year death march that killed off 70% of life on Earth. This included many coral reefs, which didn't return for another 100 million years. We know of the KT extinction, the Cretaceous-Tertiary extinction, which occurred 65 million years ago, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. There was also an extinction event 200 million years ago, known as the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. But none of these extinctions explains the huge spike shown in the center of the previous chart. That one happened 250 million years ago and was the worst mass extinction of species event in the history of our planet. It was the extinction of all extinctions. Referred to as the Great Dying, the Permian mass extinction took out at least 95% of all life on the planet in fewer than 100,000 years, an instant in geological time. Professor Paul Wignall of the University of Leeds and an expert on mass extinctions told me that the Permian was the greatest crisis that life on Earth has ever suffered. Only in the past 2 decades has the cause of the Permian extinction been understood. It was speculated that an asteroid impact may have been the trigger, but more recent research by Professor Wignall, geologists, and other scientists around the world have revealed the true trigger came from deep within the Earth. The Permian mass extinction was initiated by a colossal flow of lava in an area of what is now Siberia. That was the trigger, but not the killer. The killer was under the water and under the ice, where trillions of tons of greenhouse gases, largely derived from carbon, and frozen in the form of crystalline methane, lay in wait. Thus, global warming is the force behind the death of nearly everything on the planet during the Permian mass extinction. That point is well illustrated. You can again see the spikes of mass extinctions measured by the increase in global temperatures, with the largest spike representing the Permian mass extinction. Wignall told me, there have been a lot of disasters and crises in the geological past. It's interesting to study them because they may have a comparison to today. He added, I think it is certainly extremely significant that a lot of the main crises of the past are associated with global warming, with obvious implications for the present day. The 6th mass extinction may even rival the speed and intensity of the Great Permian mass extinction, but the 6th is not represented on either of the 2 previous charts. That's because it's the one happening today, right now, all around us. And then we go on to document how the burning of fossil fuels is throwing an amount of carbon into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that's relatively similar to what happened with that giant volcanic eruption in Siberia 250 million years ago with the Permian mass extinction, and how it could be leading to a major extinction event. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Ali Senger, a health policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation, heritage.org, the conservative think tank here in town. Ali, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. And by the way, you can be tweeted at ALYENESENGER. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Ali, the Heritage Foundation is I think, uniquely positioned in this whole healthcare thing right now, because you guys are the ones who came up with what became Romney Care and what became Obamacare, and or the Affordable Care Act. It was originally proposed by Richard Nixon in 1972, and Ted Kennedy beat it back, because it wasn't single-payer healthcare. But how do conservatives reconcile? How does the Heritage Foundation reconcile the fact that your plan got put into place as Obamacare and is being vilified because, it was a Democratic president, God forbid?
I think you've definitely mischaracterized what happened in Massachusetts and Heritage's involvement there, and then also the Affordable Care Act.
Well, this is what Mitt Romney said.
Well,
he got the idea from you.
No, I think what you're confusing is that the Heritage Foundation helped Mitt Romney develop a health care plan, and then that plan was significantly changed by the Democratic legislature there. So while they did participate in the beginning of that plan, that's not the plan that became law. And so saying that the Heritage Foundation wrote that and then wrote the Affordable Care Act just simply isn't true. The Heritage Foundation has been against the Affordable Care Act since before it was passed and ever since. We've been fighting this law and its intrusion into Americans' lives for the past 7 years.
So it's an intrusion into our lives to have health insurance?
Well, it's an intrusion when the federal government takes over state insurance markets, tells everybody what their health plan has to cover, and then forces people to purchase a health care plan.
But that was part, the individual mandate was specifically part of your original Heritage Foundation program. That was the key to it.
No, I'm sorry, that's not true. That idea was originally discussed in the late 80s, but is completely different from what got included in the Affordable Care
Okay,
Act.
well, setting aside Heritage's role in this, and I defer to you. You work there, I don't. What parts of the Affordable Care Act do you want to take away from Americans?
Well, we want to repeal the whole law. Okay,
so you want to go back to the. I remember my wife had breast cancer, and the treatment was quite expensive, and we were about 4 months before the Affordable Care Act came into law. She got a letter from her health insurance company saying you're near your lifetime limit. We're going to drop your coverage, and so you want to go back to that. You want to go back to saying to women who have breast cancer,
present our position
sorry,
accurately.
you're going to have to die.
Our position is that the law be repealed and then replaced. So we certainly support some
when you
common
replace
sense
the
insurance
law,
market regulations, but what we don't support is Obamacare's $1.8 trillion worth of new health care spending and 18 different tax hikes.
Yeah. Allie, talking over each other really works well on Fox News because they got people who pot up the conservatives and pot down the liberals. But, we're both at the same volume level here. So if we talk over each other, nobody can understand what either one of us is saying. So specifically, what does this plan offer somebody like my wife who now has a pre-existing condition?
This plan you're referencing being the Republican replacement plan?
Yes.
Well, the conservative solution to that would be that if you haven't maintained continuous health coverage, you can't be charged more by your insurer when you try to switch a plan or denied coverage. It's a pretty sensible rule. It already applies to the vast majority of Americans that have their health care coverage through their employer. We just simply extend those simple common sense rules over to the individual market so that people could be protected there as well.
So what happens if my insurance company messes up or I move and I don't get the bill in the mail and I don't pay it on time, and so I'm 1 day late, my insurance coverage has technically lapsed, and I'm telling you, this is not some weird scenario that I'm coming up with. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have had this happen to them prior to the Affordable Care Act over the last couple of decades by health insurance companies. And then they say, now you have a pre-existing condition and you can't be covered. Sorry.
I think there are reasonable solutions for that person and that problem. So rather than your coverage being canceled on the very first day it's late, you could impose some type of grace period.
Allie, why should we have health insurance companies at all? It's a serious question. Why should a banker be between me and my doctor?
I think that you're right and that the third-party payment arrangement has significantly been a detriment to our healthcare system. I think that to the extent the consumer is not really in charge of their own healthcare dollar has been a bad thing. And we should get reforms that connect consumers to their healthcare dollars rather than just simply having your employer pick your plan and then you deal with your insurer. And
so you're suggesting if Louise's treatment cost a couple $100,000 that if I can't pay it, she should just die?
Wow,
that's my wife.
Very extreme.
Well, that's what you just said. You were just
accurate.
Weren't you just saying that having third-party payers, that would be either health insurance companies or the government, is not a good idea? That people should be responsible for their own health insurance, their own health costs.
Cost inflation that's happened in our country. You're grossly mischaracterizing the policy solutions that I'm representing here today.
How? Did you not just say that having a third-party payer is not a good idea?
Okay. You're very, wow.
So, well, back to my original question. Why do we have banksters? What is good about Stephen J. Hemsley, the CEO of United Healthcare, taking over $1 billion in revenue out of United Healthcare and having over 100 executives who make more than $1 million a year, and every penny of all that money that went to him, to them, and to the other stockholders of that company, every penny of it came out of somebody saying, no, Allie, we're not going to give you a liver transplant. No, we're not going to vaccinate your child. No, we're not going to pay for that. No, we're going to send, the bill, 2 or 3 times and reject it 2 or 3 times until finally you hassle us enough to pay it, which is what everybody who's dealt with health insurance companies has experienced. Why should we be giving 20% of our healthcare dollars, skimmed off the top, 25% for the smaller companies? And that's by law now. I mean, it used to be 30, 35%. Just 10 years ago. Why should we be giving 20 to 30% of our healthcare dollars to banksters?
The point of health insurers is to pool risks so that you pay a premium into the system for the unfortunate event that you get sick. You'll have an insurer to pay for your very expensive health care treatment.
You're absolutely right. So why should that be for profit? In the 1970s, I was running businesses in Michigan. At that time, Michigan had a law that said health insurance companies must be not-for-profit. And we had a factory with 18 people. It was 1973. And I remember we paid $35 a month for the health insurance for families, for all of our employees. It was cheap. The hospitals had to be not-for-profit. And this was the state law at the time. Hospitals and insurance companies had, and we had Blue Cross Blue Shield, and it was not-for-profit. Why should we be giving our health care dollars to for-profit banksters instead of having a third party? If we're going to have a third-party payment system, instead of having a third party that operates on a not-for-profit basis, whether it's like Switzerland does, where it's all the health insurance companies are required to be not-for-profit, or whether it's like the rest of Europe does, where the government provides it on a not-for-profit basis. Why not? That's an honest question.
Sure. And I think that the private market provides better health care at a cheaper rate that's higher quality for the vast majority of Americans, especially when you compare it to the single-payer healthcare system that exists in the
No, I'm not talking about health care. I'm talking about the payment for health care. United Healthcare, Stephen J. Hemsley has never given anybody a vaccine.
It provides incentives that are beneficial to consumers. If you take a look at the VA healthcare system, where that's a single-payer,
that's a
government
socialist
owns
system.
The doctors, the hospitals, and pays all the bills. How's that working out for the vast majority of veterans?
Well, the Veterans Administration is not a single-payer system. It's a socialist system. It's like the United Healthcare, or it's like the healthcare system in the
There's
UK.
one payer. It's the government.
But no, but the people who actually provide the health care are employees of the government. The buildings in which they do it are owned by the government. That is basically socialized medicine. That's what the Veterans Administration is. What I'm talking about is single payer, Medicare, Medicaid, having a third party that operates on a not-for-profit basis. What advantage is there to society?
There are nonprofit health insurance companies today.
Of course there are. But none of them control the kind of market share that the for-profit ones do. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
If you'd like to purchase your health care coverage from a nonprofit health insurer, you're able to do so today.
I can't here in Washington, D.C.
I'm sorry?
I can't here in Washington, D.C. To the best of my knowledge, there are no not-for-profit health insurance companies offering services, offering health care here.
Well, why? You have to ask yourself why. I mean, take a look at the nonprofit health insurance companies that were created under Obamacare. That's what the co-op program was. Were those successful?
No, they weren't. Because of the competition. I wouldn't even say competition, because you've got these for-profit companies that, and you know this, Allie, you live in Washington, D.C., you work in this town. Some of the biggest campaign donors in this town are people in the health. In fact, I would say probably the biggest campaign donors in this town, between pharma and the banksters who call themselves health insurance companies. They're buying politicians left and right. How does that help? Well, that's a whole other conversation, I guess. But so just to boil this down, because we're running out of time here and we're going to hit a break. We're talking with Allie Sanger of the Heritage Foundation. What should we expect under Republican Congress, Republican president, using your template? What are we going to look at? What are we going to be seeing here?
We're going to see the repeal of major parts of Obamacare through the reconciliation process. That repeal will most likely be a slow, smooth transition repeal where no one's going to lose their health care coverage that they got under Obamacare the day that the bill gets passed. There's going to be a smooth transition until the replacement plan is able to be implemented.
So the replacement plan will do what?
Well, there isn't legislative text for a replacement plan yet, but there are lots of different plans offered by various members, and all those plans center around the same basic principles of, one, getting the federal government out of the regulation of health insurance and devolving that back to state governments, and two, providing some type of individual tax relief to help people offset the purchase of their coverage in the individual market.
So you want to use taxpayer dollars to subsidize this?
Well, it's their dollars because they're paying taxes for it, so it's just that they get to keep a larger share of their own money, depending on how you structure that tax relief, of course. There could be a refundable portion for very low-income people who don't have any tax liability but still would like to purchase health insurance.
That's Mitt Romney's famous 47% of all Americans, for whom tax deductions do nothing.
Exactly. So you could potentially have a refundable tax credit or some other form of individual tax relief.
Are you suggesting high-risk pools and individual health savings accounts? We've heard these things before from conservatives.
Certainly, those can be elements of the replacement plan, but I think the focus generally has been on creating that individual tax relief so that people that don't get their health care coverage through their employer are able to access equitable tax relief in the individual market as they purchase on their own.
How is that different from simply expanding Medicaid? Oh, it keeps the for-profit insurance companies in the loop. I get it.
Medicaid.
Is that right? I mean, this is about, like you've got what, about a third of America on Medicaid?
This is about giving people the same tax relief that the rest of us are getting through our employer plans,
right,
so that they can purchase a private health care plan of their choosing.
From a for-profit company.
If they choose that they would like to do that, then they would have this tax relief to offset the cost of that coverage.
Okay. Allie Singer, thank you for the conversation, for coming on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
Great talking with you. That's Allie Singer with the Heritage. Heritage.org is the website. The Twitter account, ALYENESENGER. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what are your thoughts on the conservatives' plans for our health care? We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Elizabeth in Farmington, Michigan. Hey, Elizabeth, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Oh, I was almost surprised. I've been listening in on the phone to the rest of the conversations. I called a number of times, but this is the first time I've gotten on to be able to ask, why don't we, as progressives and as people who are protesting this awful turn of events, why don't we get really proactive? And by that I mean we start making demands. And the most efficient and most effective first demand that we could make with all these people marching in the street is we march to demand nationalization of our commercial banks, our whole banking system. We set up 50 state banks, and these profits from these banks would redound to the citizens. And we could even set up where 20% of the profits each year go towards the healthcare system, 20% go towards school, higher education, various things. We could appoint what these profits go for instead of them going, as they do currently, into fewer and fewer pockets of individuals. The private investment banks could stay doing exactly what they choose to do, but they won't do it with our money anymore. If they want to gamble with their own money, it'll be their own money. And if we want to invest our private, personal money in their schemes, well, we can do that, but no longer give them the opportunity to use what really belongs to us in this national banking system. And then we've removed the ability for people to bribe congressmen. At the same time, we reinstitute the usury laws so that no one can make more than 10% off of anyone else. And we could set the interest rates, the money that people could make in their passbook accounts, we could set that at our own rate. It could be 3%, it could be 5%, it could be 7% if we find that our receipts every year are going very well. We could make these demands. We are demos kratia, and as long as we have control of that, the people rule, we need to start making demands. What do you think?
What I think is you're singing Elizabeth Brown's song, and it's a great one. We don't have to nationalize the big banks to do this. that will produce the, oh my God, it's communism coming reaction. But if every state were to create a state bank, and there is one, North Dakota, which was created in 1909, and that bank operates for the profit of the state of North Dakota rather than for the profit of stockholders, and the money is plowed back into the state, and it works quite well. California, where there's a bunch of people in California lobbying for California to create their own bank because they've got, hundreds of billions of dollars from pension funds to just, daily operations. And they're running it all through giant New York banks. And that's crazy. And so I completely agree with setting aside the nationalization of the existing banks. I think that they would buckle under the competition of 50 state banks. And
yeah, well, I don't know. We've tried that with the credit unions, but the problem with it, until we can wrest the money away from them, vis-a-vis them not having private banks of any kind, J.P. Morgan Chase, all of those, they need to just do their own investing on their own. We need to have control over that money that's sloshing through our treasury every year. That's why I was thinking nationalize the banks, and they deserve it after what they did to us in 2009.
If President Obama was president and you wanted to nationalize the banks, I could see probably a reasonable outcome. If Donald Trump is president and all the banks, all these big banks become his toy, I'm a little concerned. Elizabeth, thank you for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Charles in Southgate, California. Hey, Charles, we just have a minute to the break. A quick one? Quick comment?
Oh, okay. I got a quick one. Well, anyway, I think the woman that you were talking to about health care was full of beans. If I had, single care or, the ability to get health care, I wouldn't be suffering in the condition I am, which is going to eventually kill me.
Ouch.
But all that aside, when I was getting some of my treatments, I found your show on Pacifica Radio, I guess about a year and a half ago. And that was before Bernie was getting going. It got me excited again. I hadn't been excited again, for politics since I was rooting against Nixon.
Yeah, I think a lot of people felt the same way, Charles. And
so I said, well, there's a little bit of propaganda here, so I'll listen to Rush Limbaugh. So I turned him on, and he is propaganda, but he doesn't give you any food for thought.
No, well, he makes his
food.
He makes his $400 million. He's very well paid for doing what he does. It's pretty astonishing. And then you got that piece that Ken Vogel and he had a co-author. I'm forgetting her name. In Politico that they wrote about 2 years ago about how, the millions of dollars that conservative think tanks are slipping to Limbaugh and Hannity and, other hate radio guys in order to promote their agenda, which is, I think, probably why when people from those right-wing think tanks come on this program, they're a little surprised that they're not being sucked up to, as it were. Charles, thank you for the call. Great to hear from you. We will be back picking up more of your calls, your thoughts on the condition of the world today and what where our health care is going to go. What are you going to do if the Republicans actually blow up Obamacare and then replace it with something like, good luck, the banksters are in charge. What are you going to do?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls after this. Stick. There is a new television ad buy going on. Daniel Marins, M-A-R-N-S, is reporting about this over at the Huffington Post. He writes, television viewers across the country have been treated to some scary advertisements about the future of Social Security. A narrator in tones with ominous music playing in the background. Our next president needs to take action on Social Security or future generations could lose up to $10,000 a year. Right. So why all this Social Security hysteria? You know, there's these groups like Pete Peterson, who's a Wall Street billionaire, and his foundation and his political action groups, and there's others as well. There's a bunch of Wall Street billionaires who really want Social Security to be privatized. Now, I can't speak to Pete Peterson's specific motivation, but the broadly accepted theory of why these guys care is, number one, that Social Security is like, you know, it's $1 trillion a year or thereabouts. It's an enormous amount of money. And if that money, I mean, it's flowing through the federal government and it's not sticking to anybody's fingers. Whereas if that money flowed through Wall Street, can you imagine how much money Jamie Dimon could make off that? Can you imagine how much money each of the big banksters could make off that? These guys would end up like Stephen J. Hemsley, you know, the CEO of United Healthcare, a billionaire. Because Congress drilled holes in Medicare. You know, I've been noticing on TV, United Healthcare runs these ads, you know, for their Medicare supplement programs or their Medicare Advantage, which takes you off the Medicare roll and puts you in, you know, largely at the tender mercies of United Healthcare. And they say, you know, we've been doing this for 30 years. Medicare's been out there for 50 years. So what happened? Well, some Republicans drilled some holes in Medicare, which provided a multi-billion-dollar industry and a multi-billion-dollar opportunity to health insurance companies and to AARP, which basically is a health insurance sales organization, a Medicare insurance sales organization. This is where AARP makes a lot of their money. And you walk by their headquarters here in Washington, D.C., and it's like a palace. And they sell lots and lots and lots of Medicare supplement insurance to people over 65 who qualify for it. And most of it is underwritten by United Healthcare. It's a really, really profitable scam or program or whatever you want to call it. So if they can get Republicans to do the same thing with Social Security, let's drill some holes in Social Security. Well, Social Security doesn't pay quite this, but you can buy insurance for Social Security. So if you start when you're 20 years old and start sending $10, you know, it would be like basically do-it-yourself annuities, right? Because Social Security is like an annuity. You pay into it throughout your life, and then you get the money back after you stop working. And an annuity is a guarantee or a pension. You know, the pensions are kind of the same thing, only they're paid for by your employers. And you contribute money to your pension as well, depending on how it's set up. But instead of going through the insurance companies, because it's not health insurance, it would go through the banks. Well, actually, it could go through insurance companies too. It just wouldn't be United Healthcare and Aetna and Blue Cross Blue Shield. Instead, it would be, you know, Farmers or, you know, whatever. I don't know, frankly, who provides annuities. But there would be a huge opportunity if they could drill some holes into Social Security, if they could cut Social Security. A huge opportunity and brand new market opening up for AARP to sell you a supplemental program for your Social Security. The ad, writes Daniel Marins, the headline is, Nation's Largest Senior Group is Using Conservative Scare Tactics on Social Security. And then the subhead, AARP is promoting alarmism about the program and giving awards to Republican lawmakers who want to cut it. And Daniel Marins notes in his article for the Huffington Post, the headline of which I just read you, the new television ad has only heightened liberal concerns. Critics of AARP's approach say the influential seniors group, which has 37 million members across the country and incredible influence in Washington, D.C., is making Social Security's financial challenges seem much more dire than they really are. In doing so, the group is playing right into the crisis framing favored by conservatives who want benefit cuts to seem inevitable. Oh, you young folks, you're never going to see Social Security. You should just go along with us and cut it. And then you'll never see it. What a nice self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Not that AARP is saying that, but it seems like actually in a way that they're saying that. Don't buy the hype. Right now, if you make over $118,500 a year, you no longer pay any Social Security taxes, which is crazy. Oh, this is amazing. The House Administration panel, Frederick Schouten is tweeting, House Administration panel just voted 6-3 to get rid of the Election Assistance Commission charged with helping the states improve voting systems. Now, what that means, Ari Berman puts that into a more appropriate context. He says the House Republicans just voted to eliminate the only federal agency charged with making sure voting machines can't be hacked. The Republicans just eliminated that. That's mind-boggling. I mean, that's genuinely mind-boggling. Kurt in Los Angeles. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, it shouldn't be mind-boggling, Tom, because I've warned you for years what the intent of the you call them the right wing, I call them the wrong wing. Okay. Our government has been infiltrated by neo-Nazi religious zealots, and they are going to turn our country upside down, just like they did the stars in their logo back in 2001 when President Bush became president. Look at the little elephant. All the stars are upside down.
Yeah, they went from being the American star to being the Satanic Star.
Yeah. And when it comes to the Heritage Foundation, Tom, ever since I heard about that group, I did a little investigation, and I've been wondering for the past 8 years, whose heritage are they really concerned about? Because it doesn't seem like they're concerned about my heritage.
Yeah.
Well, moving on. Your conversation, according to your last guest, you seem to be a bit confused, so I thought I'd call and straighten you out.
Okay. Go for it, Kurt.
Tom, every time you asked the young lady a question, she always came back with something about it being tied to the employer, and if they've had consistent coverage from one employer to the other, everything should be fine. Everything should be plain and simple and easy. But it's not so easy when you have job discrimination as rampant as it's been ever since for the past couple of years.
Not to mention unemployment.
Right. And even though unemployment, the national number is down, the unemployment amongst minorities is still in the high teens, if not 20% or more.
Yeah, and among minority youth, it's pushing 40% in many areas.
Right. And so now here's another aspect. Who's the guy that's the former CEO of Carl's Jr. and that Mnuchin?
Yeah, Pudster.
No, Mnuchin's the
Putzer,
real estate guy.
something like that.
Who's the other guy?
No, Mnuchin is the guy from Goldman Sachs. He's for Treasury. It's Pudster, right. P-U-Z-D-E-R, I think is how he spells his name. The guy from Carl's Jr. And by the way, he has not yet submitted any of his paperwork. It's looking like he's probably going to pull out. He doesn't think he'll be able to make it through congressional confirmation. Yeah. But in any case, that's who he is.
Yeah, well, I listen to talk radio all day, and I caught another program. Mm-hmm. His company alone has the highest occurrences of job discrimination of any other fast food organization in America. Okay, his little organization, Carl's Jr. and whatever little conglomerate of restaurants they have. Well, they have the most job discrimination complaints on record with the EEOC. In one case, for an example, the one that's made it up through the courts, because a lot of those cases only get taken because people settle out of court because it's just too hard to prove sometimes. But in one case, an African-American lady manager of like a Carl's Jr. or something, not a Carl's Jr., but a something in the Midwest, an equivalent to a Carl's Jr.
Parties.
She was asked by a regional manager to start hiring more white people, literally, because her staff had a lot of minorities, because she's, African-American, and she's given, the young youth in her neighborhood who want a chance to work. So she just happened to have a high presence of African-American teen boys and girls working in her particular branch. Well, she was approached by a manager or a regional person or something that said, you need to start hiring more, Caucasian kids. And she refused. Within a short period of time, she eventually, was fired and replaced with a white manager. And so this made it through the EEOC, and so it created kerfuffle. But just imagine, she's been working for almost 20 years. So now her job has gotten interrupted. And so what happens to her health care under this plan?
Right. If she has a pre-existing condition, she's toast.
Yeah. 20 years, but then she gets fired for no, good reason. But then all of a sudden now she loses her coverage. So under the Republican plan, if you don't have continuous coverage, now you're just out in the street. You're just no good. So instead of trying to do it the way Obama did, where it's like everyone and anyone, whether employed or non-employed, or with the direct payer, the single payer, whether you have a job or not, you just pay what you can into the pool and just do your thing. But they want to tie it to your employer. Well, you can't do that when you have job discrimination.
It's, the essential core difference here, Kurt, is that Obamacare was or is somewhat predicated on the assumption that healthcare should be a right, not a privilege. And, of course, the Supreme Court blew that up when they said individual Republican states can refuse to expand Medicaid for the working poor. But, the idea was everybody should have the right to health insurance, whereas the conservative response, the Republican response, is everyone should have access to health care. In other words, if you can afford it, you can buy it. If you can't afford it, tough, sorry, you can die. And, that's basically what it all boils down to. Carl, there was a lot in your call. Thank you so much for sharing it all with us. I appreciate the call. Marshall in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Marshall, what's on your mind today? Marshall?
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All these protest marches have been lacking in petitions. I know you're a big fan of Move to Amend, and you covered talked about the story in South Dakota where the Anti-Corruption Act was passed. I think that we need to make sure that when these protest marches are going, that the organizers should have, DVDs, links to Greg Palast, his investigative reporting, because if we don't stop them from stealing elections, we're going to keep getting screwed.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look back at, of course, they were funded by billionaires, but if you look back at the Tea Party meetings, they had fancy signs that were printed by, print shops. They had, basically swag bags that they gave out in some cases. I mean, but we don't have that kind of funding. But I think that the marches produce their own kind of energy, and that then drives people into activism, whether it's through Facebook or on an email or just talking to their friends and neighbors. But I get your point, Marshall, and it's a good one. Thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. Deborah in Shenandoah, Iowa. Hey, Deborah, what's up?
Well, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I got to say, I want to mention I had a Super Bowl gathering with my family Sunday night, and the thing that really disturbs me is something came up about politics, and all of them are usually they're Republicans. But they brought up something political, and I asked them if they knew anything about Wilbur Ross, Steve Mnuchin, Tom Price, Becky DeVos. They knew nothing. They couldn't answer anything about them. They couldn't tell me one fact, what their issues were. And I don't know if that's everywhere, but I notice that I've talked to a lot of people here in Iowa, and that's one issue that really bothers me. All they care about is that Trump became president.
Yeah, no, and that's probably true of pretty much anybody who gets most of their news from Fox so-called news or from right-wing hate radio, is that they're badly not only uninformed, but malinformed or misinformed about the issues and about the people. And it's tragic. It's tragic that we have created this media bubble that so-called conservatives can insert themselves into and never actually experience the real world. Deborah, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after this. Welcome back. Gwendolyn, watching Free Speech TV in Rialto, California. Hey, Gwendolyn, what's on your mind today?
Yes. Hi, Tom. Thank you very much for taking my call. But I just want to know, have you noticed how Ryan and the others are using a new term into normalizing Trump? Now they're calling him the unconventional president.
Isn't that sweet?
Crazy. They're just trying to make it sound softer instead of saying a dictator.
Well,
But
he
anyway.
he may want to be a dictator. You know, keep in mind, the guy's 70 years old, and he, outside of maybe the few years that he was in military school as a teenager, he has spent his entire life getting exactly what he wants. Nobody's ever been, you know, at least his adult life, nobody has been able to say no to him. He has been the king of his empire, and he's been surrounded by people who constantly tell him what he wants to hear. When he went to the White House, he assumed that would continue to be the process. I don't think the guy's ever read the Constitution, and clearly doesn't have an understanding of, you know, our form of government. If he's calling a federal judge a so-called judge, and you know, should we call him a so-called president? I don't know, but he's now in a position where it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, but that's just a side thing. But what I really want to talk to you about, you're familiar with Michael Skagel, the investigative reporter that exposed Blackwater during the Iraq War, right?
It wasn't Michael Skagel. He's the nephew of the Kennedy family. You're thinking of Jeremy. You're thinking of Jeremy
Scahill.
Jeremy Scahill.
Yeah, he's the one.
Yeah.
That when he exposed Blackwater during the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Also, as you know, they're trying to get bases open around the U.S., but of course they were especially in San Diego, but of course it was an outcry, so they didn't get that base.
But they do have, they do have operations. I mean, they've changed their name and all that, but they do have operations here in the United States. They were in Louisiana during Hurricane Sandy, or during Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, absolutely. But listen to this. What do you think about this idea? Because Betsy DeVos, you know, she's a sister of one of the brothers of Blackwater.
She's the sister of Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, yes.
Correct. So what do you think about that particular armed force that has no control becomes the brown coats, Nazi brown coats?
Well, it concerns me tremendously, Gwendolyn. And, you know, one of the other dimensions of that concern me is this piece in the New York Times that was talking about, you know, what it's like inside the Trump White House. And, you know, which the White House now is pushing back and saying, oh, that's fake news, even though it's in the New York Times and even though there's multiple sources, it's fake news. But one of the things that they said was that in the evenings, Donald Trump is up in the residence of the White House with his longtime bodyguard, with his security guy. And they named the guy, I don't remember his name, somebody I'd never heard of before. But apparently this guy has been head of security for Trump for a long time, and Trump trusts him. What happened to the Secret Service? I mean, he's brought private security into the White House. This is a first. Why is not a big deal not being made of this? You know, it's like, wait a minute, you know, is this more privatization of the government? I mean, it's bizarre. Gwendolyn, thanks for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Wendy in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Wendy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Just wanted to call in on the healthcare debate.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Canada until I was maybe my mid-30s. I've gotten a few years older now, but my parents still live there. And I just wanted to let you know, I hear so much or read so many anecdotal negative aspects about the Canadian system. And I just wanted to say I'm totally with you about the dollars that are just being sucked out by basically administrators. My father is 90 years old. He was in the hospital a couple of years ago with like his 6th heart attack, was in the hospital for several days, had a couple of stents put in. His total bill was $45, and that was for the ambulance ride to take him to the hospital.
Wow. An ambulance ride here in the U.S. is a minimum $500. That's incredible.
I know. And then it was interesting when I was up there a few years ago and they were debating on the national news, the CBC, about the fact that the ambulance costs were going up from province to province. And in some cases, they were raising the rate to $100, and people were finding that burdensome. And I was just sitting there as somebody who has their own insurance because I lost my husband's coverage, almost 65, and my premiums are over $600 a month just for myself right now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And, of course, I have massive deductibles and that to meet. Just wanted to say to all those naysayers about the Canadian system, I'm sure they're not listening to your show, but absolutely the way to go. People up there complain about it at times, but no one wants to give it up.
Yeah, the Canadian single-payer system, let us add, Wendy. In fact, the guy who started that, Tommy, what was his last name? He's
Tommy Douglas.
Tommy Douglas, thank you. Kiefer Sutherland's grandfather, as I recall. And he is arguably the most beloved Canadian in history. Or do I have that wrong?
No, you're right. He was, yes, absolutely. He was from one of the western provinces, and I can't remember
Saskatchewan.
Which one off the top of my head.
It was Saskatchewan. I wish somebody could get in to talk to Donald Trump and say, because Donald Trump's primary motivator is being loved, right? And say to him, look at Canada. Look at Tommy Douglas. Here's this guy. He was a politician in Saskatchewan. He came up with this idea for single payer. They tried it in that province. It was enormously successful. It eventually spread to all the provinces. And then the federal government came in and kind of semi-consolidated it. And he is beloved by his people. You could be as loved as Tommy Douglas is. You could be, generations from now would be saying, yes, Donald Trump, he gave us single-payer health care. He cut our health insurance costs. He killed off the bank, not literally the banksters themselves, but killed off the companies that, that are these parasitic leeches, on the backs of our healthcare system. But unfortunately, he's surrounded by Republicans and conservatives. I doubt the message will ever get through to him. But Wendy, thank you for sharing that with us. It's great to hear from you. Thank you so much. Bob in Lowell, Arkansas. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm a veteran to start with, and you had the person on, I can't remember, the Heritage Foundation or what it was, and she talked about degraded the VA. She just made a quick zinger about.
Yeah, the VA is actually the most. It gets the highest ratings of any health insurance system in the United States.
Exactly. I just get so tired of people talking about the VA that have no idea what the VA does.
Right.
And here's what the VA did for me. After Thanksgiving, I went into an emergency room at the VA. I had chest pains, and they scheduled me for a stress test the next week. It tested positive, and January 4th, I had 80% blockage in my in an artery, and they did that on the 4th, and I was out the same day. And that's the terrible VA. Within a month, I had a life-saving, which I think 80% blockage, a procedure done by the VA. And how is that terrible? There are bad things about all healthcare systems, but what Trump should do is find out what's good about the VA and duplicate that for everybody.
Yeah, which would be basically creating the National Health Service in the UK. It's and I'm not so much a fan of that as a national system as I am of single payer, but either one would be fine with me. I just want to get the parasites out of the system. I don't understand. Well, I do understand why conservatives and Republicans are constantly defending the parasites. It's because the parasites take some of the money that they steal from us or they squeeze out of us, let's say, and they kick it back to these right-wing think tanks, and they kick it back to the Republican politicians in the form of donations and whatever you want to call it, and that's why that happens. But Bob, thank you for standing up for the VA. I appreciate the call, and thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Jane in Seattle. Hey, Jane, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hello?
Jane, you're on the air.
Oh, it's Jan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jan. What's up?
That's okay. Wow. Okay. I am also calling about the heritage person, and anybody else who talks about nonprofit healthcare not working, it absolutely infuriates me. I've been a member of Group Health Co-op of Puget Sound since 1957.
So you have a nonprofit health insurance company or co-op in the Seattle area. That's great.
Yes, it has been since 1947. It has just merged with Kaiser, which is also an amazing nonprofit healthcare system. Let me give you my little story. I started paying my own way at Group Health in 1972 when I became 18. Mm-hmm. And in 1975, I was in a near fatal car accident in Eastern Washington. I spent what people at Group Health and at Kaiser pay is monthly premiums.
Right.
After the car accident, I spent a week in ICU in Eastern Washington, and then I was transferred to the Group Health Hospital here in Seattle. And I spent 2 weeks in ICU there, 2 more months on the rehab floor, physical therapy twice a day, all the nursing care, all the pulmonary. I had chest tubes. I was a mess. So I got home they thought originally that if I survived, I wouldn't be ever walking again. I was home and walking. I wouldn't be walking. I wouldn't be home until Christmas. This happened in September. I was home and walking on Thanksgiving. At any rate, I never saw a bill for any of it. There's no bill.
Yeah.
I paid my monthly premiums. It covers everything.
Yeah.
Medicine. You need surgery? There you go.
Yeah.
You need medicine? There you go. You need x-rays? There you go. Now I'm on Medicare, and you're right. It covers everything. Yeah. And I have a monthly thing for Medicare, but because I'm still at Group Health. Now, Group Health just merged with Kaiser, so Kaiser Permanente is the big.
So they're offering the Medigap policy now for you?
Well, I've been on Medicare for about 10 years now, and I don't know. It's just Group Health.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I've been on single payer health insurance for a half a year now. It's Medicare, and it's just amazing. Like you, I never see a bill. Things happen. Nobody has turned me down for anything. I had surgery 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago tomorrow, and
I'm so glad that worked for you.
Yeah. It is so far so good. I'm pain free, so I'm very pleased with it. But I'm also very pleased with the single payer healthcare system that we have here in the United States that I'm now using. Jane, thanks so much for the call, and my apologies to all the folks on hold from Georgia, California, Utah, Rhode Island, Michigan, California. Call back tomorrow. We'll get to your topic, and thank you for calling. In the meantime, between now and tomorrow, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us to participate. It's not, it's not enough to vote. It's not enough to complain. It's not enough to post on Facebook. You gotta get out there and get involved. And there's so many cool ways to do it. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.